Hey everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Academy Anonymous podcast, where we're covering all the Oscar news, all the updates on the Oscar race, and we're giving you our takes on Oscar predictions. It's great because Oscar voting has officially begun. This is the week. It began on Monday. It's going to run through the week. We're going to have a great series of episodes. We're going to rally and give you final predictions for all the categories, so you can fill out your ballot and make your best conjecture as to what the final five will be. And yeah, got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. It was a really eventful week last week that was capped off with the Golden Globes. As always, I'm your host, Joseph.
And I'm Jules, and welcome. Glad to have you guys here again. Just a quick note off the top, make sure to check out our website, framesandflicker.com. We've been updating our predictions for the Oscar top 24 categories constantly, so that's always fluctuating. There's always predictions up there with precursors and whatnot, especially post-Globes. And also check out our Twitter account, which is at Academy Anon. Both the website and the Twitter are on our cover art for the podcast.
And before we get started, let's just take a moment to express our condolences to the friends, family, loved ones of the Hungarian maverick filmmaker Béla Tarr, who passed away a little while ago. He was an immensely talented filmmaker who left his mark on cinema. You and I, big fans of The Turin Horse,
Yes.
But just these really reflective, meditative, stark, black and white pieces.
He's regarded as a master of slow cinema.
Yeah.
You know, he's one of the leading figures of, if not the leading figure of Hungarian art cinema.
Yeah.
You know, and really one of the greatest auteurs in world cinema.
Yeah, and it's a big loss. We encourage everyone to visit their cinema, visit his cinema. It's a fantastic, unique experience that'll expand sort of your appreciation for what the art form can do. And so we were really saddened to hear about that. Segueing into the discussions we're going to have, I think, like I said, we're going to rally and have a series of episodes that tackle all 24 Oscar categories, our final predictions in each, where we're seeing there could be a dark horse that maybe leaps into the final five, which categories are a little bit more difficult to predict, maybe some surprises that we're going to see, maybe compare that a little bit to what maybe the common prediction is at the moment, right? If you look at something like Gold Derby. And so we'll have our take on that because part of the fun is sort of predicting where some of the oversight is going to occur. That said, maybe the best thing we could do is set the stage for everyone listening in terms of everything that happened last week, which is going to play a part into our and everyone's final predictions. And I think the best place to start is the DGA 5. The DGA 5 gave us the 5 most likely films we're going to see in Best Picture. The DGA has a history of repeating, right? With whoever that landed in the Directors Guild top 5 is usually the top 5 Best Pictures. And so the nominees were?
It was Frankenstein, Marty Supreme, One Battle After Another, Sinners, and HAMNET.
Right. And so I think the big headline there, right, was that no international title made it.
Which is not very surprising for them.
Yeah.
They typically, it was expected that they would snub a foreign language contender, but it ups the possibility, I think, that in the sort of predicted 5, the consensus 5 for Best Director in that category, that possibly we might not be seeing 2 foreign film contenders landing in that top 5.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's important to remember this was a category, a group where Anatomy of a Fall did not land in the top 5. Yet we could argue it was a top 5 film at the Oscars, right? But Amelia Perez did. And so you and I thought there was enough appeal for something like Sentimental Value to land here. That was not the case. It's the first nomination for Josh Safdie here, correct? And first nomination for Ryan Coogler, and all the other filmmakers have been there before. Going off of that, we got the 5 from the Cinematographers Guild, the ASC, and there was possibly a very surprising omission, and the first instance we have that of the 5, one film is maybe a tiny bit weaker
than the rest.
And so who were the nominees there?
Nominees were Autumn Durald Arkpaw for Sinners, Michael Bowman for One Battle After Another, Darius Kanji for Marty Supreme, Dan Lauston for Frankenstein, and Adolfo Veloso for Train Dreams.
All right. And so parting from the DJ5, Train Dreams scored a nomination here, which was great to see. Adolfo Veloso, we had predicted his nomination here. We had predicted a lot of these nominees, but we did predict Lucas Zhao, right, to make it in for Hamnet, which was the big snub.
A big snub, yes. Just a reminder, Lucas Zhao has appeared in this guild before. He actually won the award in 2018 for Cold War, and that also got a nomination for Best Cinematography, and he had a special mention win, I believe, for Ida in 2014.
Right. So
he has shown up here twice.
Yeah. So this guild continues their pattern where if Lucas Zhao is shooting black and white, they'll nominate him. And if Lucas Zhao is shooting in color, they will not nominate him.
Right.
Because
he was also snubbed for the Zone of Interest.
Exactly. Which you and I would argue is another possibly top 5 movie at the Oscars. Didn't get the DGA, but certainly a strong contender there. Lucas Zhao didn't get the guild nomination there, did not get the Oscar nomination there. So now the discussion becomes, does he have enough to leapfrog one of these filmmakers? The big surprise here, right, was
Marty Supreme.
Darius
Kanji.
Yeah.
But it makes sense because this guild really loves Darius Kanji. He has several nominations. In fact, he has almost twice or 3 times the nominations in this guild, and he does have Oscar nominations.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's a very revered cinematographer. So it's kind of weird that I believe he only has 2 Oscar nominations as of right now. It's strange, sort of lagging behind his guild, which is something to keep in mind when we're considering final predictions for cinematography.
Right. And I think also Darius Kanji, remember last time he was at this guild, he was able to surprise and be the solo nomination for Bardo. It was also the year where he got a Lifetime Achievement Award, I believe, recognition at this guild. And so, as we said, the discussion becomes, does Lucas Zhao have enough to get back into the category?
Absolutely.
Going off of that, we had SAG Ensemble nominations, and something pretty historic happened that you and I were quick to predict, sort of, or to sort of call out, seeing the nominees for the DGA, which is all 5 nominees for SAG Best Ensemble match the director top 5 for the Directors Guild Award. Last time that happened, 2004. When the nominees across both categories were The Aviator, $1 Million Baby, Sideways, Ray, Finding Neverland. Here's the caveat. The SAG Ensemble that year featured 6 nominees as a result of a tie, and so they had Hotel Rwanda among the SAG Best Ensemble nominees. Did not get a DJ nominee, obviously, but the point being there that, it is really telling that consensus has calcified to such a point where these 5 films are repeating at the SAG, at the DGA, you and I having ongoing discussions as to whether that is going to play a factor at the Academy Awards.
Yes, and also, again, as you were saying, it's telling that no foreign film has been able to sort of break through that calcification the way that Amelie Paris was last year when it made both.
Right.
This year, something like Sentimental Value made neither.
Because that's the other big headline, right? Which is, not only did the SAG Ensemble mirror Best Director at the Directors Guild Award, but no foreign films showed up.
Yeah.
Right?
Which isn't that surprising because, again, the SAG is not very welcoming to foreign performances if you look at, their past history. So that's not too surprising. It is a little surprising to get completely blanked.
Right.
And not have one nomination, for, possibly Sentimental Value somewhere.
Right.
I understand possibly it not getting Ensemble. Maybe it would miss Renata, something like that. But to be completely blanked is strange.
Yeah.
But like I said, if you really do look at their history, it's not that strange. And it's certainly a problematic factor about the SAG.
Right. And so we not only had the more international performances from Sentimental Miss, but Elle Fanning did not show up either, which could be troubling. This could possibly become a thorn on the side of any narratives for a win from any of the actors. Possibly this could be something we revisit as we discuss.
It reminds me a little bit of how I wouldn't go so far because it reminds me a little bit of how Regina King missed for If Beale Street Could Talk, and she still ended up winning the Oscar.
That's right.
So I think it would be more damning. It would be more damning for a lead contender.
Yeah. So not fatal, but not great necessarily.
Right. Yeah. I think supporting contenders might be able to get past that.
Right.
Certainly lead actors wouldn't.
And it certainly, that goes into the idea that we saw this happen in lead actor also because Lee Byung-hun didn't make it in, but one of the favorites, Wagner Moura, did not make it in, the secret agent either.
Right.
And some foreign films do get in here. Like it's worth saying that Marion Cotillard got in here for Olivia Rose, and she was nominated again for Rust and Bone.
That's true.
Penelope Cruz did get in here for Volver, even if she didn't get in for Parallel Mothers.
That's true.
So it's a little bit dicey, but suffice it to say, it's yet another bad day for international films, and I would argue an especially bad day for Sentimental Value, because to me, it's again that foreign film that has the ability to cross over. Segue that into the Producers Guild Award, where it finally did cross over. And so in the Producers Guild, we got a view of the 10 favorite films possibly to land Best Picture nominations. The question became, do international titles crack the top 10? Do any of them do it? Or is it safer to predict all American titles? At the end of the day, Sentimental Value was the only one to make it, probably by the skin of its teeth. But there were so many correct calls that you predicted, right?
Yeah.
So tell us who the nominees were.
So the nominees were Begonia, F1, Frankenstein, Hamnet, Marty Supreme, One Battle After Another, Sentimental Value, Sinners, Train Dreams, and Weapons. Now, I think the very interesting thing here that you and I were discussing back and forth is, you know, people were very much expecting blockbusters like Wicked for Good and Avatar 3 to show up here. I was always kind of skeptical because I thought, you know, it's not the first time that we've seen the Producers Guild Awards, which are known to embrace blockbusters often, to kind of go their own way when those blockbusters have underwhelmed. And those films, though they've made money, have underwhelmed.
Right.
And that's sort of part of their awards narrative.
Right.
And so it makes perfect sense. And we predicted that Weapons would get in. And we also predicted that F1 would get in, which are successful blockbusters that are also critically acclaimed and well liked.
And original films.
And original as well. So I think it's pretty damning that a movie like Avatar and Wicked for Good don't get in here, considering, again, that this is the guild that is most receptive to blockbusters, the same way that I think it was pretty damning that Wicked for Good only landed one nomination at the SAG after landing 4 nominations, or maybe 4 or 5, I believe, at the SAG last year. So, you know, we're seeing a big downshift for those 2 blockbusters that I think should echo into the final predictions for the Oscars.
And I think that, you know, there's a chance that this is just going to give us more motivation, because we called this early, but this all goes into our theory of diminishing returns, right? A film should not be performing as well as its predecessor. And you see that in something like Dune, which goes from double digits down to 5 nominations and basically survives to a Best Picture nomination. But, you know, Avatar and Wicked for Good are sinking really quick. And so we're not only predicting, you know, Best Picture snubs, but diminishing returns. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for either of those films to be scoring, you know, 5 or 6 nominations based off these showings, you know, because if any place was going to be a little bit more enthusiastic about championing them and celebrating them, it would be places like the Producers Guild Award and places like the Golden Globes, what we'll talk about next.
And I think it would be odd, because I think some people have floated the idea. I think it would be odd for Wicked to land, let's say, around 5 nominations and have as many nominations as Dune Part 2 did that actually did make it into Best Picture.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of odd. There should be a lower number.
Yeah.
Avatar, the same thing. You know, it would landed 4 nominations for Way of Water. It should land even less than that.
And sort of, I actually kind of like the comparison you made, I think, a few weeks ago in one of the episodes. If you want to check it out earlier, you had talked about Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. And so Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, the sequel, follows Black Panther, which was a huge breakthrough for Marvel and superhero films that got, I believe, 8 nominations, including Best Picture. Wakanda Forever, 7. Wakanda Forever dips, right? And it gets, I believe, 5 nominations. Wakanda Forever was nominated at the Producers Guild Award.
Yes.
And so that just goes to show you where Avatar, Fire and Ash, and Wicked for Good stand right now in this race. Right. Which is kind of the opposite in terms of F1 and Weapons, which have a little bit of momentum now. And let's see if they can capitalize on that, especially F1, because F1 has been doing well across the other guilds, you know, the other tech guilds, you know, things like production design, for example. And Weapons hasn't been doing too shabby either. And in fact, it has some steam off the idea that Amy Madigan could win potentially Best Supporting Actress. Well, that leads us into the next thing to talk about, I think, which is Golden Globe winners. Let's talk Golden Globe winners really quick. Again, some calls that we made a little bit earlier, I think, that we were sort of on the money What did you think? What were some of those maybe shifting moments in the ceremony that maybe we had called?
Well, we got 13 out of 15 correct, which I'm pretty happy about, even though we could have gotten 14 out of 15 because we took a gamble on best screenplay, and we thought that the recent trend has been that the winner for the screenplay category tends not to be a winner for the best film category. And since it felt very obvious that One Bad After Another was destined to win best film, comedy or musical, they would pounce at the opportunity to give a film not winning something major, a little bit of a bone. So we thought Sentimental Value might win something here in best screenplay and possibly start a narrative like Anatomy of a Fall, where it became the frontrunner for screenplay after it won the Golden Globe. That did not happen. And in fact, PTA won all three: screenplay, director, and One Battle, One Best Picture, which just goes to show the strength of the film and how that kind of unanimous, sentiment should echo into the final Oscar telecast.
Right.
So we didn't get that right, best screenplay. And the other one that we did not get right was the very surprise win for The Secret Agent for foreign film. We thought, as many did, that it would be Jafar Panahi for It Was Just an Accident, if only to get an opportunity to have Jafar Panahi on stage, such a monumental figure in the filmmaking community and such a heroic narrative. You would think that the Golden Globes would want a moment like that in the telecast. They completely walked out empty-handed, didn't win a single thing.
Right.
So those were the two that we got wrong. We're very, very, very happy about the call for supporting actress. We were one of the few people that predicted correctly that Teyana Taylor would win Best Supporting Actress over what the favorite was, which was Amy Madigan for Weapons. I was quite happy about that, and I'll mention something really quick about that, circling back. And we correctly called that the Best Picture drama was going to go to Hamnet, and it was not going to go to Sinners.
Yeah.
And the popular kind of belief was that it would be Sinners.
Yeah. And we kind of felt the award that traditionally this group would give Sinners is box office achievement, where they finally got on stage. Yes.
Right. And also it's one of the few moments that we got to see Sinners accept an award because they didn't show Sinners winning best score,
which is weird,
which was ridiculous. That being said, you could feel the love in the room for Sinners. So I think that's something to keep in mind going forward. And going back to supporting actress really quick, I found it very interesting, that we have a weird year where it hasn't happened in a few years, where the winner for the Critics' Choice and the winner for the Golden Globe differed. That doesn't happen all the time. And in fact, if you go back and you look at the times that it has happened, there's a little bit of a trend that if both of the contenders that ended up winning in those precursors were, indeed nominated, Oscar night tended to go in favor for the Critics' Choice winner. So I'm thinking something like, for example, in 2015, when Alicia Vikander won for The Danish Girl and Kate Winslet won for Steve Jobs in 2015, it ended up going in favor of Alicia Vikander for The Danish Girl. A year like 2013, when Lupita Nyong'o won the Critics' Choice, but Jennifer Lawrence won the Golden Globe, it ended up leaning towards Jennifer Lawrence I apologize, ended up leaning towards Lupita Nyong'o for 12 Years a Slave. A year like 2020, when Maria Bakalova won for Borat, but Jodie Foster won for Mauritanian. Jodie Foster wasn't nominated, and so, that kind of goes to moot a little bit, and obviously Maria Bakalova didn't win either. But I'm just saying that I found it interesting that when there has been this sort of difference of opinion amongst those two awards, it kind of favors sometimes the Critics' Choice. That's just something to keep in mind.
Right. It's kind of interesting also because we had sort of said the idea, Amy Madigan is a previous Golden Globe winner.
Yeah.
And so that might have played a factor, but we had sort of said we want to see two supporting races, one that acknowledges a first-time winner like Teyana Taylor, and one that acknowledges a veteran. Stellan Skarsgård won his second award, right? And, that following the huge shutout for Sentimental Value, that's got to be a win, right? And we predicted that he would edge out Jacob Elordi. But again, traditionally, actors with two Golden Globe nominations, they tend, at least one of those actors should walk out a victory. This year, you had Jeremy Allen White, you had Jacob Elordi, you had Amanda Seyfried. and all of them walked away empty-handed, right? Which is not a good thing.
All of them had several nominations. All of them had a couple nominations this year. That doesn't happen all the time. And like I said, I think it was kind of strange to see the Globes not favor Jacob Elordi, just because it kind of feels like a very Globe thing to do, award a very, up and coming, promising young actor. It's very much in their wheelhouse. However, we did feel that after that Critics' Choice win, that I just didn't feel right to have Jacob Elordi win both the Critics' Choice and the Golden Globe. And we also felt like of the group of actor winners, we wanted to see a little bit more diversity.
Right.
And just Wagner Moura by himself possibly winning Best Actor Drama wasn't enough.
And I think also what's kind of interesting about the Globes, which has a little bit more of a prestige factor, both horror supporting performances do not win versus the Critics' Choice, which is a little bit more open-minded about that. They do win. And so I think it's fun because I think we're on the trajectory to have, actual races in the supporting categories. I think you and I have had some discussion about how after SAG nominations, we may actually get a more complicated supporting race, because it's not impossible to think with Stellan Skarsgård not there that race becomes now, can Jacob Elordi win, or can someone like Benicio del Toro pull out an upset? And in supporting actress, where you do have Teyana and Amy Madigan, it's just a fantastic place to award Wunmi Masaku for Sinners, which is another beloved movie there. And so we're going to have fun in the supporting category. So we could look forward to that. Jessie Buckley, again, gave a great speech. Rose Byrne walked out with a win, which was great to see. It wasn't a guarantee, but it's, Rose Byrne is going to be nominated, which is fantastic, or it sounds very much like she's going to be nominated.
Very much. She deserves to be nominated, but after the SAG nomination, that felt like a done deal. And now add to that a Golden Globe win for comedy musical. That's just done. I will say that before the ceremony started, you and I were contemplating how important it was for Amanda Seyfried to win this award, because her spot is in much jeopardy, because the industry as a whole, based on these guild support, is not responding to the Testament of Anne Lee, which is not very surprising if you've seen the film. But if you've seen the film, you do see how, what a powerful performance Amanda Seyfried gives, and she's more than deserving to be mentioned here. However, I think that the film that she's in is tanking her chances a little bit. And so
I'm possibly mishandled as well.
Yes, exactly. And so I really feel as uncertain about her Oscar nomination as I've ever felt. And I would right now, if you asked me today and I had to, gun to my head, predict if she's going to get nominated or not, I would say that I don't think so. It's not looking good.
Makes sense. It's
not looking good. And, in her place, and we'll talk about this more as we get further into the race, it'd be interesting to see who takes that spot.
Jafar Panahi loses international film. That could put a damper on the potential for it was just an accident to win the Oscar. Secret Agent getting a lot of steam. Wagner Moura walks away with Best Actor. We had predicted that, but it was a great moment.
He was the favorite,
He was the favorite. Great moment for him to be on stage, and just gives him more ammunition to make up that SAG snub. On the other side, Timothée Chalamet continues having momentum. He wins Golden Globe Comedy. Much better speech this time.
Oh, much better. Much better.
I think everyone agreed it was much more comfortable.
I wonder if he
much more poised.
I think we wrote about it on our Twitter that he'd take notes.
I think his coach helped him review the tape, so that, because there was a much better this time. I do think that in the room there was just an abundance of enthusiasm for one battle after another. PTA, picture, director, screenplay. Not very often can you win all those and then survive to win the Oscar, but it looks like this may be one of the few films that just may be able to. I want to mention, One Battle has had a love fest all season long. Great SAG nominations where it leads again and it ties a record. Still, the narrative to look out for is how many nominations can One Battle get at the Oscars. We'll be discussing that over these series of episodes. Can it break history in its overall nominations? Can it tie history in acting nominations? Can it break history in acting nominations? I thought something to look out for is when Paul Thomas Anderson wins one of his Golden Globes, he takes a special moment to talk about Regina Hall, who was the first actor to get the script and one of the very first collaborators that he decided on for the project. And she did not get a SAG nomination, but it's things like that that are going to keep her in the conversation.
I agree 100%. I think that was very smart. And I hope it works out because Regina Hall probably is my favorite performance in that film, or second favorite, Benicio del Toro. So that was nice to see. And I think after that, most things were as expected. K-pop Demon Hunters had a good night. Jessie Buckley, it's over, period, done.
Julia Roberts does name drop Ava Victor's
Right.
Sorry Baby, which is very much still in the hunt for an original screenplay nomination. So that was really interesting to see. I
Right.
think Hamnet scores Best Picture. I think overall, it wasn't the night that the international films wanted. It was just an accident. 0. Sentimental Value, 0.
No, Sentimental Value too.
Oh, excuse me. Sentimental Value 1. I
No,
believe.
because it won. Oh, that's right. Yes.
Sentimental
supporting actor,
Value 1.
Yes.
It was just an accident. 0. Secret Agent
yeah.
2. So it was certainly a comeback after those terrible Guild nominations in the States, but certainly not, a bulldozing success where Panahi can win Best Director and Sentimental Value can pull out Best Picture. But it was a bounce back, but it was still, it's going to be a challenging road for all those titles looking ahead. And finally, I think, why don't we finish our summary over what happened last week with a little bit of what we saw from the BAFTA. So no BAFTA nominations yet, but we have BAFTA long list, which is about 10 contenders per category. We get to sort of see the mindset of the voters, who has the momentum right now, what voters are watching and what they simply are not watching. And I think, again, the idea here being that international films struggling a little bit, the favorites, again, showing a lot of strength. And so who got the most BAFTA nominations?
The most mentions went to PTA's One Battle After Another with 16. Again, there's a pattern here that I expect to carry on into the Oscars. PTA's film constantly breaking records. I think we're leading towards that for the Oscars. Then it was Hamnet and Sinners with 14. Then it was Marty Supreme with 13 and Begonia with 12, as well as Frankenstein with 12. And then Sentimental Value and Wicked both had 8.
So it was good to see Sentimental Value show up with 8, not in double digits yet, but 8 isn't too bad. But again, I still feel like what we're seeing is the strength of the DGA 5. You have One Battle 16, Sinners 14, Hamnet 14, Marty 13, and Frankenstein 12. It's kind of an interesting way to cut it. I also think it was a great sort of showing for Begonia. Yeah. Right? I was not expecting 12 mentions here. And that's something that we have to sort of have in the back of our mind as we start making some of these predictions, because at the very least, it is being seen, and it is being seen, 10 times as often as something like The Secret Agent maybe being viewed, because Wagner Moura did not make the list, for example. Right. Not a shock, but not great news. Right. Sentimental Actors showed up, except
Elle Fanning,
which cannot be a very good sign.
No, it isn't.
Right? It was not necessarily a great showing for Jay Kelly. I was happy to see Delroy Lindo on that list. Yes. And that's something we can talk about later.
And keep in mind that Sinners still managed to get a supporting actor nomination at the SAGs. Yeah, it was Mal Caden, but still, let's not overlook that.
Yeah, that's. I think you're absolutely right. F1 did pretty well. After that PGA mention, not in Best Picture, I believe. But it is all over the place, as did Weapon show up a couple of times. It did not show up, for example, in casting, where it was on the Oscars long list, right? But it showed up in editing, which was kind of an interesting place. Amy Madigan showed up. The screenplay showed up. And
I think SIRÃT didn't have the day that it had for the Oscar shortlists.
Right. As we said, just in general, international films kind of struggled, I think, a little bit more. SIRÃT showing up on the Oscar shortlist for cinematography. Of course, that was not the case at BAFTA. I think one of the most interesting things that I saw was when Yorgos landed in the top 10 for director over someone like Guillermo del Toro. I think that gives me something to think about, right?
But I think there's still a certain set of rules for director that are different, I think, from the acting categories, for example, that I still think that they're trying to include 5 men, 5 women, and something like that.
I do believe that's the case, but they do take the most popular of the 5. Right. So it did so happen that in Best Director, one would believe that Yorgos outranked Guillermo, which was interesting.
Very.
Another kind of interesting thing that we saw there in that category is we saw a mention for Katra Benhania for the voice and humor job, which was really fascinating to see. And voice and humor job also shortlisted for international film there. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. All right. And I think that finally sets us up to talk about final predictions for the Oscar nominations, first batch of categories. And I think we have both decided to start in a fun place, a category that's not completely up in the air, but has some question marks surrounding it. And let's start with Best Animated Feature. So I think the consensus here is that we have about 3 films that I think are pretty solidified. And that is obviously the success of K-pop, which is really angling for the win here. Kind of interesting because this is sort of a revisit of the collaboration for Sony Animation and Netflix. They did Mitchells vs. the Machines. I think the one hiccup here is that people have talked about K-pop not being shortlisted at the BAFTA for animated feature, and that might be a complication for the win, but it should not complicate the nomination. I think at the Annie Awards, right, which is the guild for professionals in the animation industry, it had a leading, I believe, 10 nominations, and that's a really good showing. Zootopia 2, right, for Disney is something we should be expecting.
Yes.
I think the next spot might not be a film that is super popular for the win, but it was sort of a standout in terms of, a critic's darling and more of an art house film, and that's ARCO. And which premiered at Cannes, and it was bought by Neon. Natalie Portman's executive producing that. So it doesn't seem like it's in the conversation for the win, and I don't think it's walked on with many wins. In general.
Yeah.
I remember it sort of lost the Los Angeles Film Critics Association to another film out of Cannes, but it should have enough. And Neon has been in this category before,
correct,
with Flea and Robot Dreams.
Yes.
And so after that, you have 2 spots, and it's interesting because I think the next likely contender is probably Little Emily.
Yes, I believe so. I agree with you. I think it was mentioned at the Golden Globes. It was mentioned in the BAFTA long list. It was also actually mentioned in the BAFTA children's list, which I think that overlap is indicative, or might be. It did do well at the Annies. And Annecy is also something that we should discuss a little bit.
Yeah.
It did well there as well.
Yeah, so I believe it won the Audience Award at Annecy, which is a big deal. And that's, for example, something that Memoir of a Snail from Australia won. And so that's a good sign. The Annecy Crystal went to ARCO. And so like last year's Crystal winner, Flo, and audience winner, Memoir of a Snail, made it in. I think we're thinking that this year that will repeat. Even if I will say one of the complications here is just the idea that both of these films have a French background. I wonder if that'll be an element. And the other thing is that G-Kids has had a little bit of a dicey history, right? Because their last nomination was for the latest Hayao Miyazaki film, Boy and the Heron, in 2023. But other than that, they've had a huge dry spell. So they've sort of been like, G-Kids can get in as long as they write the coattails of Studio Ghibli. But without that, they've had a tough time. Before that, the last, Studio Ghibli film that they got in for, the last film that they got in for that was not a Studio Ghibli film was Mirai.
Yes.
And so it could be a little bit dicey. We've seen it and we think that the animation is strong, but some of the storyline, we wonder if just the fact that they're also, filmmakers who are just starting in the positions of director and writing, if that may be a factor as well.
Could it open it to us now, possibly?
Right. And those filmmakers, have some history in working in projects, for example, like I Lost My Body, which was nominated. But just is the mix between them being, filmmakers that are less established, it being a more ambitious storyline that may not be the easiest for voters that sometimes just vote for whatever they took their kids to. And the fact that it's G-Kids and it's an additional French film, if these are things working against it.
Right. And also I think there's something worth considering when we're talking about the animated feature category is the rules have changed in a way where I think the category is open to more voters than ever.
Exactly.
Which I think lends itself to being a very populist list, as you were saying.
Yeah.
What did I bring my kids to?
Right.
What did I watch?
Absolutely. That's part of the danger here. But I think what is helping it is possibly, a lack of competition this year. I think it's important to mention that we should have, blockbusters, films that cater to family and children, and that were successes at the global scale and the U.S. scale. But you should also have art house films. We loved Memoir of a Snail, and that got in. Flea, Robot Dreams. These are films that have that sort of international clout. They don't make a bunch of money, but they're just emblematic of the industry, the animation industry, throughout the world. And
and last year I think we saw that with, Memoir of a Snail getting in alongside a film like Flow.
right.
So I don't think this film is impervious to having that sort of foreign influence.
Right.
But like, as you said, there's always the danger that it becomes, just populist.
Right. And I will say that we're also seeing, I think, less competition in this category, because one thing that has sort of stood out throughout the years is that films that don't have much of an imprint at the Annie Awards, again, the Guild for Animation Professionals, they don't tend to make it in. And so, for example, one film that's really sort of, I think, a dark horse here is something like Demon Slayer, which would be pretty historic for an anime. It's made a bunch of money across the globe. It's got Crunchyroll and Sony behind it. It was a big box office success here in the fall when everything was sort of flopping.
Yeah.
And it got that PGA nomination, which was fantastic. And it got a Golden Globe nomination, which is fantastic. But it didn't score.
And it also made the BAFTA long list.
And it made the BAFTA long list. But it didn't score a single nomination at the Annies. And we haven't seen that happen, where a film can go from 0 Annie nominations to a nomination in this category. And that killed so many movies, not just Demon Slayer, but you look at movies, for example, like Boys Go to Jupiter and Endless Cookie, to more fringe festival films that got Independent Spirit Award nominations. Bill Plimpton has a title, but it didn't get any nominations either. There are just so many films that missed it this year. Just a few that got, scraps here and there. Something like The Twits got a 1 or 2 fixed. Stitch Head, In Your Dreams.
I Live in the Clouds.
Yeah, I Live in the Clouds is one of the few sort of art house international titles to score a nomination. So you would think that if there's going to be an international title to maybe watch out for, it could be Olivia in the Clouds. But again, just the Annie snubs for all these films were just really a killer. Same thing with something like David from Angel, which did really well at the box office. So looking at that, I think Little Amelie should keep its spot. A couple of films that did get Annie nominations but have just underperformed everywhere are Two Veterans, which is Scarlet, premiered at Venice, but has not taken off at all. It got an Annie nomination on the independent side, writing and directing. That's not a surprise because his previous film, Belle, got those mentions too and still failed to get a nomination. And then the great Céline Chaumet for A Magnificent Life, right? Which also went to Cannes in a special screening.
It got the Annie Independent.
It got the Annie Independent, but it went to Cannes. It was sort of overshadowed by these other two films.
Yeah.
But he has never really had an animation outing that could have been considered for an Oscar that didn't land. So I do think, watch out for that, because this category does favor veterans. And right now, with K-pop Demon Hunters, Little Amelie, ARCO, we have an abundance of filmmakers getting in for the first time. Zootopia 2 is like the exception, where the filmmakers have been there before. But maybe the fact that Sylvain Chaumet, whenever he animates and is in contention, he gets in, that could end up working in his favor. But again, I don't think there could be 3 French titles. So it's sort of, he could leapfrog something like Little Amelie possibly. But I'm not sure Sony Classics has done a good job with it. And again, it's just clear that it's his least beloved of all his films, all his feature-length films, and that audience, critics and audience, I would suppose, prefer the other 2 French films. Which leads me to sort of believe that the last spot is really between 2, again, as you said, popular films, which is Bad Guys 2 from DreamWorks, which has sort of done better than expected, and ELIO
from Disney Pixar. Both of which, well, for example, ELIO was not a success at the box office. Bad Guys 2 did a little bit better than ELIO did. And interestingly enough, the veteran for ELIO, this filmmaker has been there before, with Bao in the short film category, and then Turning Red also.
Domishi,
I wonder if that could be hindrance.
A detriment.
In that, she's already shown up a few times, and they'll think that they want to
is a third nomination
right.
sort of, is it too early considering that, there is a little bit of reputation here that Pixar has struggled lately, right? And so ELIO not only makes less money, but it was not embraced at all by audiences. And like everyone knows sort of the troubled history that ELIO was supposed to come out in 2024 and they delayed it. They had to recut it and do some work on it narratively. And so much so that, like I said, just the audience did not show up in America. And so like, I think it's a film that basically brought Pixar to its knees. Can they really pick up a nomination?
Yeah, well, they want to reward that.
Exactly.
But also it has done well in the precursors because it got the Globe, it got the PGA mention, it got the BAFTA long list mention alongside the BAFTA children's film mention, and it did well at the Annies.
I mean, it tied K-pop at the Annies for 10 nominations.
I think that's no small thing.
I don't think so. And I think that's major.
Yeah.
That being said, I don't think there's many times where Disney gets 2 in this category and loses. And so is that going to be a factor, sort of knowing that, the idea here is that this is K-pop's to lose. Right. And if that is the case, is it going to hurt the narrative of Disney getting 2 in here? Now, what I will say about ELIO is, while there exists the question of, is it too soon for a third nomination for that filmmaker? And it's co-directed by another filmmaker who got nominated for a short film, I believe, as well. We do need veterans here, and everyone else is sort of new, because the Bad Guys 2 filmmakers, they're new filmmakers that haven't been recognized in this category before. And so I'm thinking that may be the reason why the category breaks for them, alongside of the things that you're saying. It's done well in all these other places. It just did well at the Visual Effects Society in the animation section. And so clearly people in the industry find a lot to champion about it and respect about it. I think maybe the thing going for Bad Guys 2 is it has certainly done better than Bad Guys 1.
Yeah.
Like just in terms of its reception at these places like the Annie Awards, where it's up for Best Feature, and at BAFTA, where it has a chance to make it into the final, and it got PGA nomination. And the money is not great for DreamWorks, but it's not as bad as ELIO.
Yeah.
But maybe also this idea where, is the whole snub for The Wild Robot and DreamWorks still a little bit fresh?
Right.
And do we sort of say, let me nominate DreamWorks again, even if they're going to lose this category, because I sort of like the trajectory that the company is going in, as opposed to putting Disney in twice.
Right.
That may be a factor. And so it could be that we're seeing a fight between those quote unquote populist films that are nowhere near as successful as K-pop for that final 5th spot. And possibly at worst case scenario that both of them get in and out muscle something like Little Amelie, which would be a little bit sad to see because it's a more imaginative film.
Yes.
But so I think, so what do we settle on for our final predictions?
So for animated feature, our final predictions are K-pop Demon Hunters, Zootopia 2, ARCO, Little Amelie or the Character of Rain, and ELIO.
Right. And then keep an eye out for Bad Guys 2.
Absolutely. And I would also keep an eye out for, as you were saying, A Magnificent Life.
Yeah, could happen. And I mean, Scarlet, not totally out of the realm of possibility, but, I really question if either of those films have enough to for this last little sprint. We'll see.
Okay, and now moving on to the next category that we'll be predicting and giving our final predictions for, and that's original score. And we have a short list here, which makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah,
I think sometimes
a little nicer.
A little nicer when we have a tiny little group to choose from.
Right.
As opposed to like, a world of films.
Right.
And there's some things that are a little bit tricky about this category that we'll be getting into. I think it's safe to say that Sinners is the frontrunner in this category and in no danger, hopefully, of missing this category. I also want to point out that a film like Frankenstein, Alexander Desplat, is very much decorated by the Academy, but he especially tends to get nominated when his films are nominated for Best Picture. Yeah. And considering that Frankenstein is such a big Oscar contender, that should be a safe nomination as well for Frankenstein.
And that's actually the first time that Desplat will return since his nomination in 2019 for Little Women, which is kind of interesting.
Exactly. And then I want to say that at least it's predicted that One Battle After Another should show up here too. Johnny Greenwood's score. It's very prominent in the film. Johnny Greenwood has been here before.
Finally broke through with Phantom Thread for Paul's film.
Right. It got an eye for the Golden Globe. It made the BAFTA long list mention. The Society Composers organization was also cited there. That seems like a pretty safe bet for original score. Do you think it's in any danger of possibly missing?
I mean, I guess maybe if they feel like that's enough nominations for Johnny Greenwood. He has 2 right now. He has when he broke out for Phantom Thread, and then he got in for Power of the Dog. But seeing how sort of beloved One Battle is just across all the branches and film community and across the disciplines, it makes me feel like it's in no danger here. That in fact it's more likely to have the discussion of can Johnny Greenwood win as opposed to can Johnny Greenwood miss.
Right, exactly. And I think that's kind of where it stops being easy and it gets a little tricky.
Right.
And so I want to say that a favorite to get nominated here, Max Richter composed the score for Hamnet. Max Richter is one of our favorite composers. He's certainly one of mine. I listen to him all the time. He has never been nominated, even though he's been shortlisted a few times.
He's got a history here, though, right?
Yes.
I mean, famously, his track was used in
We're going to get into
right.
We'll be getting into that, but first I just want to mention that in the precursors, it has done well, very well. I got an eye for the Golden Globe and made the BAFTA long list. The Society Composers Organization was cited there, as well as the Hollywood Music and Media Awards. Those are good places to be cited in. The issue with, as you were mentioning, the issue with Hamnet is while it does have an original score that's very prominent in the film, the most pivotal moment in the film is underscored with his very, very iconic, popular musical composition in the nature of Daylight. If you haven't seen the film, sorry for spoiling that.
Well, I mean, we're not saying what moment, but we are saying they use a song that has been featured across many a film already.
And has even been featured in a past Best Picture nominee.
And derailed its chances in the original score.
And that film was Arrival, and very famously that score was disqualified. It could not make the cut. And again, that score, The Nature of Daylight from Max Richter, is used very prominently in Arrival, and it's used extremely prominently here. And again, a very pivotal moment, probably the most important moment of the film. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's something that will be a detraction for this branch, for the music branch. The fact that such a crucial moment is, pinned to this musical composition.
Right.
Or will that be in a way a reminder that this is a composer, a gifted composer, one of our greatest composers, contemporary composers, that has yet to receive a nomination and should certainly have a nomination by now.
Right.
And this is an opportunity to nominate him. I also want to point out, really quick, that the rules that affected, I believe we read this, that the rules that affected Arrival's chances of being nominated, was disqualified. Those rules have changed and have, a very little bearing here.
Right.
I think the rules now is that I think only like 35% has to be original music.
Right.
And, that was not the case in 2016. Right. So there's no danger. Obviously the film hasn't been, the score hasn't been disqualified, but I also think that goes to show that maybe perhaps that's not as big a deal to this branch anymore.
Exactly. I think obviously this is important because there were, articles and editorials and headlines written about it that yes, the score for Hamnet does qualify. And I will say, in defense of the nomination and the film, that while that song is used rather prominently, the other work in the film is also very singular.
Yeah.
It stands out from everything else that Max Richter has done and really sets the tone for the film.
Absolutely.
That said, if there is a snub, we will be revisiting this topic, right, as to whether that derailed yet another movie. But I do think, we're sort of siding with the idea that Max is finally going to get in here, that he's in the right vehicle.
Right, that it's about time to embrace him into this group.
Right. And Hamnet is just too much of a favorite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Then there's also, again, even though that crucial moment is, accompanying, that musical piece accompanies that crucial moment, there's, as you were saying, there's enough original work here that, you can't say the film is just that musical moment.
Right.
It's a very lovely score.
I think it's really well used. I think you're right. This is finally going to be his breakthrough, which often happens, right? Sometimes these filmmakers who have these amazing careers and have never gotten their flowers. They just happen to get onto the right project that crosses that bridge. So I remember when Carter Burwell, finally got that nomination for Carol after like years of amazing work, all with the Coen brothers, for example. He finally got that nod. And so I just think that you're right. The work is strong in the Best Actress frontrunner in a film that got 14 BAFTA long list mentions. I expect him to show up here.
Yeah, let's hope. Like I said, he's one of the greats, certainly in my mind. And it'd be nice to see him finally get embraced. But again, as you said, I don't think it's a slam dunk.
Now, I will say that this, I think, leads us to really the really interesting place where this category lands. And we're going to revisit it throughout the entire, final predictions. But this is the first place where it comes into effect, is just the idea that we have 4 Best Picture nominees in this category so far. We got Sinners, Frankenstein, One Battle, Hamnet, 4 Best Picture nominees, 4 of the DGA 5, right? And the final DGA movie is Marty Supreme, which also has had a lot of accolades for its score.
And right now it's a favorite to get that last spot.
Right. Which would be the first nomination, right?
For one point. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think what we've sort of seen, right, in our analysis is that this category should not line up exclusively with Best Picture movies, right?
Right.
We haven't really come across that, since when?
I believe the 90s.
Yeah, I think it was like 1998. Yeah. And asterisk, 1998 was the last year that they had 10 nominees in this category.
Right, because there used to be one for comedy or musical and one for drama.
Exactly. And so 1998, when you had Shakespeare in Love and Saving Private Ryan and Life is Beautiful and all those films sort of make it into score, the same thing with 97, for example, you had a comedy category and a drama category.
Yeah.
As long as there's only been 5, you've always had films show up that were simply not Best Picture movies.
Right.
Whether it's something like Encanto or something like Soul or something like The Good German.
Right. Or like Passengers.
Passengers, exactly. So I do think that, the predicted 5 from the consensus right now is the 4 we've stated and Marty. But that's a problem, right? Because that's 5 Best Picture movies, and we are already sort of that we don't.
That's not the trend.
That's not the trend. That's a huge rip in history.
Yeah.
We don't like it. That being said, it foregrounds this issue. Are we living in a moment? Are we in a particular year where the 5 favorite films are so head and shoulders above every other film that we're just going to see the same 5 repeat across category after category after category? Because the international films cannot catch up, and because other films, for example, like F1 or Weapons, are just not going to be able to edge them out as movies that these voters, when they vote for a category, they're not just voting for the best job, but they're also voting for what they think is the best film. It's not going to be able to edge them out. That's something that we're going to revisit over and over and over again. Are we going to see the DJ 5 just show up time and time and time again?
Right.
Now, if we side with history, that should not be the case, and that should certainly not be the case in original score.
Right.
And we're thinking right now that that will not be the case, and that one of them will miss, and I think our money is on Marty.
Yes. On paper, it makes sense for Marty to be nominated because obviously the score is foregrounded in that film. It adds to a lot of the texture that's in the film. We're thinking that possibly because the score has a sort of anachronistic sort of quality to it, that might be something that is unattractive to some members in this music branch, that it doesn't necessarily follow alongside parallel to the time period in which the Marty Supreme film is set in the 1950s. That might be a point of contention, possibly. Also, this is a composer that has,
is relatively new to them. It's not, they have not been exposed to them,
and also relatively new to composing for films.
That's right. Yeah,
in general, that all those things might make him the more vulnerable contender of these 5.
Right.
But we also have a few issues when we talk about score and predicting this category, because the same way that pattern that we've been saying exists, there's also a pattern that typically the 5 nominees shouldn't come from, for example, the Golden Globe.
Right.
The Golden Globe, in other words, the Golden Globe shouldn't have the 5 nominees.
Yeah.
And as well, the PGA,
yeah,
the Producers Guild shouldn't have the 5 nominees either.
Because again, this is just a category that has sort of a history of, just welcoming different types of movies. So whether it's, for example, the GOAT, John Williams, getting in for a Star Wars film, or Indiana Jones, or Justin Hurwitz getting in for Babylon, which failed to get a PGA mention, right? There's consistently been a gap in this category where a spot belongs to a film that is not a Best Picture movie, that is not necessarily a Golden Globe nominee,
That is not a top contender for Best Picture.
Not a PGA nominee.
Yeah.
But maybe this category is going through a weird moment. Like typically in the long list for this category at the Oscars, you'll see some animated films, and animated films do well here. This year there were no animated films, right? You had said that the music from ARCO was beautiful. Maybe Zootopia can get in there. Neither of them got in. And so maybe this is just a weird year. And with that being the case, Marty can still sneak in, but we think that there's just too much history going against it.
I also think that if you look at the films that were shortlisted, there's not a lot of quote unquote quotes that they might kind of reserve for that kind of open spot, the same way that they would with, for example, for John Williams, got nominated a couple years ago for Indiana Jones, and people didn't really see that coming.
Yeah, he'll get nominated for almost anything.
Yeah, he'll get nominated for literally everything. There is not a lot of people here. There's actually a lot of new composers, or composers that would be on their second or third nomination, in films that are not amongst the top films. Basically we solidified this into a fight for this last spot between Marty Supreme, which we've already delineated, the issues there, F1, which is Hans Zimmer, who has 12 nominations, maybe not John Williams level yet,
right?
But certainly a very respected composer within the music branch and the industry. So a fight between those two, and the third contender being SIRÄT,
right,
which did very well in the American long lists, but did not do well in the BAFTA long list. And also, curiously enough, if you've seen that film, the soundscape in that film is so essential to understanding the film and appreciating the film and unlocking the depths of that film. That it makes sense that it was it had an impact in the American in the Oscars shortlists, but it's surprising that, for example, at the BAFTAs, where we said it didn't do as well, it actually did not show up in the long list for original score at the BAFTAs.
Right.
And it was also not nominated for original score at the European Film Awards, despite that film being among the most nominated films of the year.
That really sticks out to me.
That's weird.
That could be a problem, because this year the European Film Awards had nominees, and so they didn't find room for it in the top 3 spots. Whereas, for example, they did nominate the work of the music on Bugonia, which was shortlisted at the BAFTA. And again, at the BAFTA long list, SIRÄT did not make original score, but it did make casting. So there are members watching this film and responding to it well. It just did not show up in score. The European Film Award miss sort of worries me. I know that, for example, something like All Quiet on the Western Front, which had a lot of international support, it didn't get that much for its music. It got it more for its sound design, but it still managed that Oscar nomination for music. But Volker was a previous nominee. And so Kangdon Ray, the composer of SIRÄT, this is one of his first films, very early in his career, does not have many credits. That could end up being something that hurts him.
Right.
I think of something
but it might also put him on a sort of even level with someone like the composer of Marty Supreme.
That's not bad.
They're relatively new to this, film space.
Yeah. With the exception being that, like Marty Supreme's composer, I remember when someone like Jerkskin Fendrix gets in for Poor Things, right? That's one of his very first credits too. But Poor Things is a nominee in the double digits. Yeah. Which seems more likely for Marty than it certainly seems like for SIRÄT. So not just the idea that it's easier to break in as one of these brand new composers when you're in a Best Picture movie, but when you're in a very highly favored Best Picture movie. I think you and I sometimes talk about like when Mika Levy was able to break in here for Jackie without a Best Picture nomination, and with a film that only scored 3, right? But Mika was already coming off a BAFTA nomination for Under the Skin.
Right. And again, it's worth mentioning that Jackie did get nominated for music at the BAFTAs.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
SIRÄT cannot.
SIRÄT cannot. And so we've had this debate back and forth, because then you have this other guy Hans Zimmer, right? Which is maybe the biggest GOAT on the list right now, right? He's no John Williams
the short list.
On the short list. And he's also famously coming from a snub, right?
For Dune Part 2.
From the disqualification for Dune Part 2, which he took issue with. And he won for Dune Part 1.
Yeah.
He didn't go to receive it.
Yeah.
At the same time, you know, I remember he was ineligible for Top Gun Maverick. And so he's finally eligible for a reteam with Kaczynski. F1 did well at the PGA. This film also listed in song, and we know there's crossover there. And so can the stars align for him to get back in here?
I think it's also worth mentioning that of the 12 nominations, I think about half of the time Hans Zimmer has gotten nominated for Best Original Score when his film, the film that's being nominated, also does well in the sound categories.
Right.
So there's a correlation there.
And F1 is being pegged
and
as
F1 is being pegged as a favorite to get nominated in the sound category.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little worrisome to, you know, not put F1 when it has these things going for it.
Right.
And again, SIRÀT is missing some pivotal things that makes me pause and a little nervous.
Right.
That being said, you know, I think ultimately you and I have sided for SIRÀT for a number of reasons. Number one, if we put F1, that film still made the PGA, and so we get crossover there that we don't necessarily want between the PGA and the original score list.
Yeah, which doesn't usually happen.
Exactly. It also got an eye for the Golden Globe. So you know the same issue you have with SIRÀT, you face with F1. There's no change there. In SIRÄT's case, you have a film that could make the final five and most likely, very possibly, not be nominated for Best Picture. So we keep that stat alive.
Yeah.
It was not nominated for the PGA, so that also makes sense. Yes, it was still nominated for the Golden Globe. Again, we're kind of going off precedent there. That might be an issue. But also what helped me at least side more with SIRÄT is that I really feel we're in this moment in time when, you know, the Academy as a whole throughout every department and discipline is shifting. And there's this foreign influence and foreign appeal that's ever present, ever growing. And you saw that by SIRÄT having such a performance on these Oscar shortlists, even if it didn't have it in the BAFTA.
In the BAFTA,
it had it here in the
American.
In the American. And so, you know, I think that goes to show that, you know, the amount of new members and new foreign members that are coming into all branches are having a very potent effect on these nominations, which I think, you know, foreign voters especially are probably very aware of a film like SIRÄT, and probably even more so inclined to list it pretty high on their ballot.
Right.
And as well as you can't watch that movie and not see that the film is contemplating sound and music, you know, in such a emphatic manner,
right?
You know, which I can't help but feel that members of the music department would appreciate.
Yeah.
You know, for example, I know people talk about how, you know, there's a sort of rave aspect to the SIRÄT score.
Certainly.
You know, that people might say, well, they didn't go for that kind of similar aesthetic, but not totally with last year's Challengers, you know, which is a very upbeat, somewhat techno score that was snubbed, even though it was a favorite to get in. But the difference is that, you know, I would say at least that the difference between SIRÄT and Challengers is that Challengers is about tennis,
right,
and about some other themes, but it's not really about sound,
right.
And a lot of SIRÄT is about sound and the soundscape and music, you know, that I think that helps a movie like SIRÄT where it didn't help a movie like Challengers.
That's going to sort of resonate to, you know, the sound adjacent music branch, right? Because the music is, you know, part of the story, you know, the same way like the sound, the sound and the score are characters in the film. I think that's an argument for why it's going to appeal to voters. I do worry about that European Film Award snub, for example.
Yeah.
That being said, there is going to be a group of voters who say it's not really a score for the film. It's just music on top of the film.
Right.
You know, music being used by the film, but it's, you know, it doesn't feel like it's music that was necessarily tailor-made for every scene moment by moment. And I think we had the discussion that what we're seeing is, you know, the first battle of like the car films, because you got F1 versus SIRÄT here, you know, two very different journeys by wheels, you know what I mean? And it's going to be really interesting because I feel like we're going to revisit this battle in sound.
Mhm.
Where again, the conversation is, can both of these films get in? If only one gets in, who has the edge?
Yeah.
Is SIRÄT more of a sound film and not a score film?
Right.
Or is it more of a score film and not a sound film? And vice versa for F1, right? So I think that's going to be fun to look at. I think we're siding with SIRÄT for now, but F1 is strong here. The one we're sort of a little bit lukewarm on is Marty getting in here. And again, if Marty does get in here, I think we may be in store for a announcement that has the DJ5 all over the place.
Right. And I think some other films that we kind of contemplated that we wouldn't be 100% shocked if they made an appearance is a film like BUGONIA.
Yeah.
Which did well at the BAFTA long lists.
European Film Award nomination for that.
It actually had a European Film Award nomination. It's also a past nominee. So we get some more veteran, presence in the category. That's a film we contemplated, and could possibly Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor get nominated for Tron Ares, which didn't do well critically, didn't really do well in the box office either.
No.
But they were snubbed for challengers.
That's right.
Just last year.
Sort of like Hans Zimmer, sort of the same kind of narrative. We're like, well, we got to make it up to these guys. And I think sort of what's interesting is that, like, again, there's these parallels between F1 and Tron Ares because they're both also listed for song. Right? And so we have a couple of opportunities again. And Reznor and Ross were listed, I believe, for both song and score last year for challengers. I do think that there are going to be voters who enjoy the Tron Ares music. And Tron Ares, I got to say, had a fantastic showing on the shortlist because it got listed for score, song, and visual effects. And so it's very much, I think, walking a path similar to Alien Romulus, where it overperforms how often you expect to see it. And that could produce a surprise nomination somewhere. Yeah. And these composers are respected enough for that to happen here. But I will also point out that it's worth mentioning, just an extra layer here, is that Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, they tend to get nominated alongside sound as well. Right.
Right. And so that's something that always kept us a little bit, kind of second guessing the nomination for challengers.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it didn't happen. They didn't get nominated. It didn't get nominated for sound either.
Yeah.
So the fact that Tron Ares
missed that shortlist is really significant, especially considering that sound has been the category where the Tron films have been most welcomed. Right. So you're right. That could be a bad sign.
And another one last composer that I'd like to mention or film that I wouldn't be 100% shocked and is on my radar, I'm just not sure it makes it in the end, is the score for Train Dreams. Bryce Dresner has made the shortlist in the past. He's part of the band of The National, if you guys are aware, the great band. And he's, had made his foray into films. It's been there for a while. Train Dreams is a Best Picture favorite. It's also a film that is a heavy contender in the original song category. And it is the kind of score that I think it's a very beautiful score, among his best, that I could certainly see this branch be, appeal to this branch. But it doesn't really solve our issue about Best Pictures, the 5 in the original score being all Best Picture nominees.
Because you're pegging it to show up Best Picture.
Right. And also that, Bryce would be nominated if the film gets nominated for song.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be nominated for score. He doesn't have to be nominated twice, but maybe he gets nominated here in score and not song.
It's possible.
So that's another film to sort of, be aware of.
Right. And some other veterans that I will say, showed up here included the composers of House of Dynamite, Jay Kelly. You have the composer for Wicked, but again, he bucked history by getting nominated last year. I don't think that's going to happen. And so Hedda, for example, another veteran composer who's a previous winner nominee, they just feel a little bit far. So even if this category does welcome sort of tangential films like A Good German, for example, I do feel that we're sort of surrounding ourselves with the correct films with our initial conversation, not these longer shots. I'd be more surprised about it, but again, not impossible. This category does like to include outliers.
Yeah. So again, we feel that last spot is a battle between Marty Supreme, F1, and SIRÄT, and right now we're giving the edge to SIRÄT. So our final 5 for original score are Sinners, One Battle After Another, Frankenstein, Hamnet, and SIRÄT. Okay, and now we're moving on to our next category, which is Best Original Song.
And I think this is another category where, again, there's been a lot of solidified contenders, but there are one or two in the final spots that are debatable. I think, as always, with every Best Original Song category, the best place to start is with Diane Warren. And can Diane Warren ever be snubbed again? I don't think she's been in this category since 2016. I think was the only year that she was not in the 5, and I don't think she was, she had a song in contention. She was in there for 2015 also, but a solid streak since 2017. We're coming up on a decade. Now she's up for a documentary about her own sort of life, which maybe that could be extra sort of motivation for the music branch. I will say, before we start this conversation, remember, the music branch votes for both original song and original score. And so that's made out of composers, lyricists, music editors. So that branch encompasses all those different voting bodies. So she's got a documentary, Diane Warren Relentless,
Yes.
I believe. And the song is Dear Me. She already has a career Oscar. She won that, I believe, in 2022, 2023,
Right.
but that has not stopped her from continuing to get competitive nominations. And
I remember.
Yeah,
I remember the year where she lost to Billie Eilish for the 007 song.
right.
And you could just see her in the background. And she
Frustration.
was like very visibly frustrated when she lost. And very much, I think you could see that she was mouthing like, I can't believe they did this to me. I can't believe they did this to me again.
Yeah.
So I think she certainly wants that award.
The competitive Oscar.
Yes, I think that means something and makes perfect sense. They obviously very much revere her. She's in a sort of John Williams category for original song.
Exactly.
But I just don't think that she ever finds the right vehicle, because more often than not, if you have a best picture film that's in this group, that tends to be the favorite for the win.
Mm-hmm.
The only ones that kind of buck that trend are the animated films.
Right.
That they're so popular they managed to score a win here.
Yeah.
And she's
Usually in
right.
conjunction with animated feature, right?
Right, exactly. And so it's always a question mark if Diane Warren can get nominated again just to lose.
Right.
Is it a form of torture? Punishment?
That's really funny. But anyway, I do, Kesha would sing the song. She's on the track. But I do think that the actual material, the idea of it sort of being a portrait of Diane Warren, could be potentially endearing and move voters and sort of say, there aren't enough freaking lyricists and Academy Award nominees who work in this branch and in this field to get their documentaries. So I'm all for it. Or it could be the opposite, which it feels maybe to some voters self-aggrandizing and maybe like, can I really nominate Diane Warren in service of a documentary about Diane Warren? So I do wonder if it'll play out, but I don't think it's ever intelligent to not list her among the final 5, right?
Right, 100%.
That cannot be a smart move.
100%. And then I think there's at least, honestly, 3 other contenders that are looking extremely good for a nomination here.
Good shape.
Very good shape. I'll start off with K-pop Demon Hunters. Just won the Golden Globe. It won the Critics' Choice. Golden. I'm a big fan of that song.
Huge hit over the summer, right?
Huge hit. We all love that song. It's an anthem of sorts. I think every time that the composers win this award, Best Original Song, at least in the last 2 telecasts, they've made poignant speeches.
Right.
I think that can only add to the narrative and the possibility that voters are going to want to see them on stage.
Netflix does well here, and that helps.
Exactly. Netflix also does well. So K-pop Demon Hunters is safe for a nomination here. And then I also want to talk about Sinners. Again, music being such a important aspect to that film.
And to Ryan Coogler's films in general.
Yes, in general. It should easily get nominated here for I Lied to You. And I think Miles Caton is a co-writer on that.
He actually is not.
Oh,
He
he's
actually
not.
is not.
Okay.
No, that's, I believe, Raphael Sadiq, Ludwig Göransson again.
Yeah.
Miles Caton is actually on the other song.
Oh, okay.
The last time I seen a son. But yes, certainly I Lied to You is the favorite of the 2. It's the Golden Globe nominee.
And I think in a different year where there was a little bit less competition, because I do feel that this category is competitive. you could see Sinners walking out with 2 nominations here.
I would
It would
revisit
make
that.
sense.
I would revisit that for the 5th spot.
Right.
But certainly I Lied to You feels like it's right there with Golden. Like if Golden wasn't there, I Lied to You would be winning.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And then the
4th spot
to mention, or rather, I think all of these are looking pretty firm, is Wicked, which should easily get a nomination here for at least the song that Ariana Grande sings, Girl in the Bubble,
Yeah.
which I think is the better of the two anyway.
Stephen Schwartz again.
Stephen Schwartz has been recognized here before. And, just a quick note on Wicked, in terms of sequels in general, when you see them pop up, subsequently, there's a pattern that emerges, and that's that the sequel tends to get nominated in areas that the initial one did not. Think about how
Black Panther Wakanda Forever is an excellent example.
Yeah.
Because, for example, like Black Panther, it's able to get song, and that's really good. But, for example, Wakanda Forever is able to do a little bit better in the category of makeup and visual effects, while the first one gets, something like picture and production design.
Right. And also, the first one didn't have an acting nomination. The second one gets an acting nomination. So in a way, they complement each other in a way like that. So where Wicked Part 1 missed an original score because an original song because it didn't have a contender, it'll pick up that category, but it will lose other categories.
Yeah, and we talked about it like all season long last year for last season, if you want to check out the episode. It's just the idea of how could Wicked not put an original song in there. They made the correction after, got all that wonderful acclaim, and they said the sequel was going to have original music. And so automatically everyone was anticipating that. 2 new tracks, Go in the Bubble, more favored. But just that idea where Stephen Schwartz was finally able to make history last year. And after a long, long time, a musical adaptation based on a Broadway musical was able to get into original score for Stephen Schwartz. He will now, and John Powell, he will now be able to get a nomination where he's been more recognized in original songs. So, he had the song from Pocahontas. He had the song from The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Prince of Egypt, I believe.
Prince of Egypt, exactly. So he's more familiar in this category. He'll finally pick up a song nomination for his work on Wicked.
And also in a less competitive year, it might even win this category.
Exactly. It's kind of really fun because between Diane Warren, Golden from K-pop, I Lied to You from Sinners, and The Girl in the Bubble, any other year, each one of them could have won.
Yeah.
Maybe not Diane Warren because of whatever.
Because she's meant to not win.
Whatever masochistic practice the Ampus has going on. But yes, that's kind of interesting, right? So like it doesn't seem like it's in the cards for it to win, but this song looks like it's in good shape for the nomination, which leaves one open spot.
So really, I think we're just talking about one spot here that could surprise. I'd be very, very surprised if any of the 4 that we mentioned did not get nominated. And so that leaves us with a few contenders. And like I said, there are some good songs here that in other years I could easily see get in. Highest to Lowest has a very, very moving song that plays beautifully in the film. And Spike Lee has done well in these
in the
musical
branches,
categories.
Right? Again, yes. So like the same voting base that gave Black Klansman a nomination for original score and The Five Bloods, its only nomination in original score, they're voting and they shortlisted him for that song. And so like he's certainly, I think, someone who could surprise here.
Right. Sinners, as you were mentioning last time I Seen the Sun, which Miles Caden is a co-writer on.
Closes the film.
Yes, closes the film. Very beautiful song as well.
And so Miles would get a nomination if they nominate this song.
Correct.
Right.
I think something that has kind of weaned me off thinking that Sinners would get that last spot is that really Sinners is destined to do so well in so many other categories that it doesn't really need a category like this or 2 nominations in a category like this to get to the ultimate goal of 14 Academy Award nominations, which is the record of most nominations by only a handful of films that have done that. It doesn't really need a second song to get to that goal. In fact, maybe a second song might make it break 14, which gives me pause. Mm-hmm. That's one reason that I don't like Sinners.
I understand that, and I think that may end up being a factor. If we look at, again, not just a micro view, but a macro view, that may come into effect. But what I will say is that when I see Emilia Perez scoring 2 nominations and Barbie scoring 2 nominations, Sinners to me, again, as another film where the music is a character, is something that could really resonate to this branch. I think it got nominated for like 3 or 4 of the Grammy spots for song. And so I would not be surprised in the slightest for it to get 2 nominations here. Again, it's just an inconvenient moment. It's just a matter of timing, because the big complication we've talked about here is that if Sinners does get 2 nominations here, it's winning. It is going to upset Golden for the win.
Yeah, because usually the film that gets 2 songs nominated in this category, that's the winner.
Very much so, Barbie, Emilia Perez. And so since the narrative is already, rolling that Golden will win this, and again, you're going to have a K-pop song win this, and they like for this category to be sort of culturally diverse. I remember when Not To one from RRR. I think it's something that's going to really motivate them to give the win to Golden. But if you have both Sinner songs there, that may prove an issue. But another, for example, film to get multiple nominations here is something like Slumdog Millionaire, right? They got multiple nominations. And so I do feel like Sinners feels comfortable there. And I would love to see Miles get the nomination. And I wonder if some voters are going to want to see Miles get the nomination. So I really do. I really think it's really close to scoring that last spot.
Another film that we contemplated was the song from the documentary Come See Me in the Good Light. Brandi Carlile is on that track. She was just nominated rather recently for the documentary
Elton
John. So we wonder if the branch is ready to welcome her back so soon.
At the same time, I will say something going for that film is that not only do documentaries do well here, and that even though Diane Warren is here for a documentary, that they have, not often, but they have on occasion, maybe once or twice, nominated 2 documentaries at the same time, that one of the individuals who's the subject of the documentary, Andrea, she would also be listed as a writer on the song. And again, it would be a nomination for her as well. So that could be something voters look into.
Right. The Dying to Live song from the Billy Idol documentary is really cool. And Jay Ralph is attached to that song, and he's been nominated in this category before. How many times?
I think 3 nods, Racing Extinction, Chasing Ice, Jim, the James Foley Story. And so more often than not, he gets in when he's shortlisted. His most recent shortlisting was for a film, I believe, called Dust and Ash, and he did not get nominated. But that said, this branch also loves music that comes from musicians, where musicians are in documentaries reflecting on their life, like Brandi Carlile's work on the Elton John documentary last year.
Like Diane Warren.
And like Diane Warren, for example. And so is the J. Ralph Billy Idol collaboration going to be enough to get J. Ralph back into this category?
Right. Another film that we looked at, another contender was the song that made it in for F1.
After submitting 3, they got 1 in.
They got 1 in. And
so Drive, and Sheeran's on that, John Mayer. So you have these really big names. It was like one of the big soundtracks of summer.
Yeah.
Can it get in is the question.
I do worry about giving F1 too many nominations when we don't think it's going to be a Best Picture film at the end of the day.
Right.
So if you're giving it 4 or 5 nominations, you're really increasing the question, well, why isn't it a Best Picture?
You're getting close to Top Gun Maverick numbers,
right, exactly.
really, without a potential screenplay nomination.
Right.
But so there's still a dark horse. Remember, one thing you should see here is overlap between song and score. And so we definitely have Sinners there.
Yeah.
Right? We don't think something like Wicked's going to do it. K-pop's not eligible. Diane Warren is eligible, but unlikely because documentaries don't do well there. Not unheard of for F1 to score, to get nominations in score and song, for Wicked to get score and song, but we're not seeing it fall that way. But I will say that score mention for Hans Zimmer does boost up the presence of, again, same branch. If a branch sees Hans Zimmer and they see the song, they may say, well, I'll nominate F1 for score and I'll leave it off song, or vice versa. I'll nominate for song and leave it off score.
Exactly.
That could play out.
Exactly. And like you said, in another year, maybe a little bit less competitive, maybe they nominate Wicked twice, possibly.
Yeah.
But I think we ultimately settled. And then Tron Ares has a song here, and it was also Grammy nominated.
Yeah.
But again, they don't tend to do so well, when their films aren't nominated in the sound categories.
Right.
So that also made us hesitate. So we ultimately sided with what I think most people are siding it with, is the original song from Train Dreams called Train Dreams by the incredible Nick Cave, one of our greatest musicians, one of our greatest artists. I don't know if he's ever been shortlisted. I don't think he has.
I don't believe so.
But I certainly think he is a respected member of the music industry. And, this would be an easy way to give Train Dreams, which is expected to get Best Picture, another nomination. It's an absolutely gorgeous song, very much in the Nick Cave style, that I can't help but feel that when when and if voters hear the song, they'll be moved by it. It plays beautifully in the film. And so I think, all the elements are there for him to land his first Oscar nomination. I certainly hope so. It's one of my favorite tracks on this list. And I don't know, I feel good about it.
I think it closes the film in a very memorable way as well for individuals who watch the movie. And obviously it's a Best Picture contender right now, so people are being moved by the end of the film. And so to have that song hit then is really, I think, important. I know that Netflix just released like a music video for it, which is great because obviously they're really campaigning it. Netflix, again, does really well here. Not only did they get the 2 Amelia Perez songs in, but if you kind of look at it, I remember like in 2020, the pandemic year, they had a song from Chicago 7. They had a song from Eurovision. They had a song from The Life Ahead from Italy. And so I think it makes sense to see Netflix here twice for K-pop and for Train Dreams.
I agree 100%. So for our final predictions, we're going to go with the favorites. And that is Dear Me from the Diane Warren documentary Relentless. The Girl in the Bubble from Wicked for Good, Golden from K-pop Demon Hunters, I Lied to You from Sinners, and Train Dreams from Train Dreams.
Keep an eye out for J. Ralph and Billy Idol, for F1 and Drive, and for Miles Caden to possibly get in here for the second Sinners song, Last Time I Saw a Song.
And for Highest to Lowest.
That's right, and for Spike Lee's.
Okay, and now moving on to our next category, which is costume design.
So this is kind of a fun category in the sense that I think a lot of the contenders are solidified, but there's, I think, a little bit of a loophole that most people are overlooking. And I think you and I are maybe debating whether there's something there or not. And I think we're citing that there's something a little fishy, something a little off. So let's start by saying there are a few titles that feel like impossible to snub here. And so Frankenstein should make it in here.
And I think it's actually the favorite to win, if it were my opinion.
Possibly the favorite to win. Big Lush adaptation, Guillermo del Toro got in here for Nightmare Alley. Has never won this category, actually, one of his films. So and
this would be the first nomination for the costume designer.
That's right. I believe Kate Hawley. It would be her first nomination. So Frankenstein looks set here. Ruth Carter is going to be nominated again for Sinners. Does a fantastic job. Could potentially walk out with a win here. I would not be surprised at all. Period piece, but also playing with a lot of different fusion flavors and a lot of genre. So that's definitely going to be nominated. And then I think most people, and I think us, we're of the same mind. This is a category where Wicked for Good should feel comfortable and is in good shape to get in after Paul's win last year for this category. So we are expecting it to repeat.
Yes, I think the only thing that I question and I brought up to you is this idea that, why did a film like, and I don't know the answer to this, but why did a film like Dune Part 2, which again got less nominations than Dune Part 1, and we're expecting a similar thing to happen here with Wicked, why did a film like Dune Part 2 miss the costume design nomination?
Right.
And you and I have talked about it in the past. It's a weird thing that happened there. And the only thing that I think you and I came up with, or at least I did, was that possibly the voters of that camp were not attracted to the idea that the costume design didn't change that much from Part 1 to Part 2.
Could very much be the case.
And so there's a part of me that wonders, could something like that happen here? For Wicked? I mean, I think it would be a shock.
Right.
And I think a lot of people would be surprised. And if I'm being honest, considering the field that we have to consider for this category, I don't think it's likely to happen. I don't think we're likely to see a snub here for Wicked for Good.
Right.
But it's certainly something that makes me pause and question.
Right.
And I still don't know the answer to that. And I'd like to know the answer to that.
Right. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's something that we may have to end up talking about further down the line. I think the category is light in contenders, and that may really work in its favor.
Right.
But certainly we cannot ignore that last year's Best Picture nominee that downgraded from double digits to 5 missed out in costume design for very good work that incorporated, some new styles, and it missed out in makeup as well.
Yeah.
And so it's not outside the realm of possibility that just because Wicked for Good won this category last year, it is guaranteed.
Right.
I think you're right. We should not take that for granted. That being said, it is tough to find films that may stand out here, that maybe were viewed enough here.
Right.
So I do think that for the time being, Wicked for Good is safe here. And so that's 3 spots. And in the 4th spot, looking at Sinners, looking at Wicked for Good, looking at Frankenstein, I think we're missing something historical. And this was sort of our mindset last year. If you want to check out our episodes from last season, where we talked about Ariane Phillips getting in for A Complete Unknown, right? We need something sort of historical that appeals to voters in terms of having something period specific. And so like Frankenstein certainly takes its liberties, right? And that's part of the joy in it. And they're gonna, I think, respond to that. But I do think they want something period specific. They tend to like that. And then we have Hamnet, right, which is tackling the Shakespearean era, has William Shakespeare in it. Costume designer has yet to be nominated. The other costume designers, as we've said, Ruth Carter, Paul from Wicked for Good, they're former nominees, former winners. Kate Hawley's going to get her first nomination for Frankenstein.
And this category likes to see veterans.
Veterans, yes. Yeah. But we should see the first nomination for Malgosia Trzanska for Hamnet. She does good work. I think, when it first screened, there was this idea that it's a little bit more of a modest budgeted film, and that the costume design isn't as elaborate for other films that tackled, Shakespeare, Shakespeare in Love, for example. It's certainly not that. But the work, I think we've said, is precise enough.
Yeah, it's very meticulous.
Meticulous.
It's nuanced, but still, very, very detailed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also, again, they want specificity of period.
Yeah.
And that, the idea also here that production design and costume design are sister categories, and that very often the artists working in each individual field will reference each other's movies along with makeup. And so it helps that Hamnet is going to contend in something like production design as well.
Right.
And so if you put those 4 movies, which we feel pretty confident about, they feel pretty safe, but we got to look for a 5th.
Well, I'll just mention really quick that I think that's a really good point that I don't think is brought up enough. In that when you're considering predicting these tech categories, there is, as you were saying exactly, there is this overlap that should exist. Costume design is in a way speaking to production design, is in a way speaking to makeup and hairstyling. So there should certainly be overlap, and it helps when a film is meant to do well in one category, that helps it do well in another category. So that's something to always keep in mind. I'll also mention that Frankenstein and Hamnet and Sinners, I believe, were all nominated for the Costume Designers Guild in the period section, which is the most important section to be nominated in. They were all nominated there. The second most important section is the fantasy section, which Wicked for Good, I believe, won last year. Is very likely to win this year as well. It did well there. Those are their favorite categories to look at. The lesser favorite of the 3 would be the contemporary category. Yeah. Contemporary pieces do not tend to get nominated for costume design. I believe the last one that was there was La La Land, which I believe was a contemporary piece. I believe was the last one.
Actually, and I think this is a great moment to pick up on where the discussion is going to turn. The last one to be nominated was actually last year for Conclave, when Liesl Crystal got nominated for her work on Conclave.
That's right.
Now, you're 100% right. For the costume designers, and production designers as well, contemporary is a very difficult thing to cross over and get a nomination for. Not very many films do it. Conclave does it. La La Land does it. Now, the favorite, I think, to win this category, who's listed at the Costume Designers Guild, is One Battle After Another by Colleen Atwood, who they like. Who they adore, has so many nominations, so many wins. But we always have that issue, right? The contemporary winners don't always get in. When they do get in, the previous examples we just said, they tend to be for major movies, which One Battle is one of them.
Yes.
But they also tend to be for the production design. Remember, we talk about those sister categories. La La Land is a nominee for costume design and production design. Conclave is a nominee for costume design and production design. So if One Battle can somehow buck the trend and be another contemporary film to get a costume design nomination because Colleen Atwood is responsible for it and because it's just that beloved of a film, you would have to imagine that it is going to bridge the gap and get both a costume and production design nomination. Why that is a little bit of an issue, I think, is because we're talking about pushing One Battle, up to record nominations.
Breaking
overall.
14.
Breaking 14, breaking the Titanic 14, the All About Eve 14, the Ben-Hur 14. Can it happen? Maybe, but I will say that I do think that something going against it is, when you look at One Battle, as well done as it isn't, I think, period specific enough, to maybe muster those nominations for production design and for costume design.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you look at the very elaborate wear on Conclave, right? That's not the case for One Battle, right? It's a very casual wear, specific, but very casual.
Right.
You look at how many outfit changes there are in La La Land. There's barely an outfit change in One Battle, right? So those are things going against it. And sort of the same thing with the production design. This movie is unfolding in this parallel mirror sort of space that really just wants to live in this sort of ambiguous level that production designers, it might not call out to them as much, right? And so I do think that the One Battle getting nominated here is a real possibility, but there are big ifs about it. Now,
no, I mean, if you look at the field of contenders here, as you were mentioning at the top when we were discussing this category, is, it is a very difficult category to predict that final spot because there aren't a lot of places to go.
Right.
For example, Hedda was a film that received a Costume Designers Guild nomination, which is great.
Yeah.
But overall, it hasn't done well besides that. It didn't make the BAFTA long list.
Which I think is major.
Yes, it didn't
because Tessa Thompson did, for example, get shortlisted.
Right, so they're
watching the film.
Right. It didn't make the BAFTA long list, for example, for makeup. It didn't make the Oscar shortlist, for example, in makeup and hairstyling. It didn't get nominated or get mentioned in the Production Designers Guild. So it's almost like the lone mention that it got was at the Costume Designers Guild. And that's already a film that is struggling to get eyes on it.
Right. And Lindsay Pugh, again, the costume designer, not necessarily the most well-known. And I will say the costume design, I think, is very well done, especially for a gender reversal for Nina Haas's character. But I will also say that, again, it's a film where there's not many outfit changes, and that may possibly be a factor, maybe. But it's certainly, I think you're right, being underseen so that enough people even watch it.
Is Amazon, Amazon really kind of, fucked it up by putting all their chips on a film like After the Hunt, when we really feel that there was an opportunity here to get a nomination for Hedda for a very period-specific costume design shout out, for Tessa Thompson, who did get a mention at the Golden Globes, for even Nina Haas, who's never been nominated. And there's, supporting actresses, so, such a chaotic race.
Right.
So that's a fumble. The other film that was nominated in the period category for the Costume Designers Guild is Downton Abbey, the final Downton Abbey.
BAFTA listed as well.
It was listed by the BAFTA long list. It was also listed in the BAFTA long list for makeup. But Downton Abbey has not had a lot of success here at all.
Not at all.
Cracking, and they've had 3 chances to the bat.
Yeah.
It hasn't had success here at all. I don't really see why it would start now.
They obviously hold something against it about it being sort of a TV adaptation, right?
TV adaptation, correct. Unless, again, it could be a year where that last spot is so strange.
Or you just warned them down. Yeah. Like, fine, I give up and I'll nominate Downton Abbey.
I wonder if that'll happen. Part of me would feel disappointed if we kind of resolve that missing spot with the simple, let's just give it to Downton Abbey.
Yeah, it's underwhelming.
Right. And then again, when we go to the fantasy categories that were nominated for the Costume Designers Guild, Tron Ares, How to Train Your Dragon, Thunderbolts, Avatar 3, none of them really, I think, stand up a chance to break into this final 5. And then again, you go to the contemporary pieces besides One Battle, F1, Begonia, Wake Up Dead Man, Weapons. Same thing. I don't think any of those are very strong contenders.
On the plus side, Begonia did manage to get that BAFTA long list as well. But again, these contemporary films, they have a lot of trouble getting in.
And when they do get in, they're, again, as you're saying, major Best Picture films.
Right.
Which Begonia right now is not pegged to be.
Side note, Emma Stone and the costume design branch, they got a thing going on. Cruella, Poor Things. If anyone could buck the trend, maybe it's Emma Stone. But again, it is a huge hurdle to be a contemporary film.
Right. So when we, look elsewhere besides those films that did not get mentioned by the Costume Designers Guild, they all have their issues as well. So, for example, a very big film that would miss the Costume Designers Guild was Marty Supreme.
Right.
And Marty Supreme would make perfect sense in this category. It's a period piece. Actually, the costume design work in that film is very well done. But however, the way the film is shot and
its
constructed,
approach,
its approach is not the most favorable to the costume design.
Conventional.
It doesn't let you sort of just, admire the costume design all that much. There's very, a lot of close-ups in the film, etc. And I really don't like that it missed that Costume Designers Guild.
I think that's pretty
mention.
important. And I think let's circle back to that. But I will say going from Marty is that, not only do you have different cultures in the film, which at one point travels all the way to Japan, I believe, for one portion of the film. But you also have all these like different social and economic stratospheres, right? Where Marty lives and his family, and then you go up to where Gwyneth Paltrow is a movie star. And so like I do think costume designers are going to be attracted to that. Not only is the work well done, as you said, but you have these different costumes that are character defining and sort of sphere defining, and that's going to definitely resonate. But that omission is major, and we'll go back to that.
Actually, no, we can talk about it now. And the problem with the omission is that we look at past history, and no one has gotten in to this category for costume design without ever at least being nominated at some point in their career, whether it be for that specific contender they're in contention for or a past nomination, without being nominated in the Costume Designers Guild.
Yeah.
So the costume designer for Marty Supreme has never gotten a Costume Designers Guild nomination.
Right.
She didn't get one here for Marty. She's never gotten one, period.
I think that is sort of the huge detriment. You look at some of these new costume designers, and again, this is a category that tends to favor veterans. They certainly welcome new costume designers, but they tend to favor veterans a little bit more. Kate Hawley, she got that mention for this film, but she was also nominated previously, for example, for Crimson Peak, Trzanska, for HAMNET, who was hoping to get in. She was also nominated for The Green Knight a few years ago. The big issue is that the costume designer of Marty Supreme, Miyako Belize, I believe, she was not nominated for the Guild for Marty, and she doesn't have a Guild mention yet. And I think her filmography is still, sort of lean, and she works a lot with the Safdies, and she's had success with them. But I do wonder if, despite the good work on screen, if that's something that's going to be held against her. And traditionally, that has been the case, where, as you said, you're either breaking in with your first Guild nomination into your first Oscar nomination, or, for example, you're someone who maybe got omitted at the Guilds and is surprising with your Oscar nomination. But most of the time, you will have had one or two Guild nominations in the past.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think right now the consensus for the top 5 does include Marty Supreme.
Yes.
And that...
And it would make perfect sense, too.
And it would make perfect sense, right? Because it is a Best Picture movie, and sort of we have the DGA 5 there, sub out one battle after another for contemporary bias, and put in Wicked for Good, which was last year's winner, and the list makes a lot of sense, except when you look at the idea that Miyako missed the Guild nomination this year, and she doesn't have one yet. She would be the rare exception for that to happen. And so looking at that, I think that's where we think the hole is.
Some other contenders that we looked at.
The BAFTA long list has a couple of...
Right, Nova Vogue had a BAFTA long list mention, but that's it. Nuremberg had a BAFTA long list mention for both costume design and makeup, and an Oscar mention for makeup.
Historical as well.
It's historical as well, but he's also not a super well-known costume designer. Smashing Machine got a BAFTA, is another film that we talked about because it got some mentions in makeup for BAFTA long list and for the Oscar short list. 2 other films we talked about that we don't know, could there be a surprise lurking, are films like The Ugly Stepsister, which made it into the Oscar makeup shortlist, and Kokuho, which is both in the foreign language shortlist and the makeup shortlist.
Ugly Stepsister sort of reminds me of like how Pinocchio got that makeup long list mention and was able to pull out makeup and costume.
However, Pinocchio did get a Costume Designers Guild nomination.
Right. So the same sort of issue is coming up against the costume designer of Ugly Stepsister. That being said, they have been working for quite a while.
And Kokuho.
And Kokuho. But I do think that, at least, playing in the realm of fantasy and fairy tales is usually more fodder for costume designers than one battle after another, typically.
Right.
But yeah, so those are some titles that stuck out. Then there's one outlier title that hasn't gotten any love, and that's Testament of An Lee, which at one point looked good for a nomination here.
Well, I always questioned, again, we go back, we've talked about this before. After you saw the movie, I very much questioned how much it would appeal to get nominated for anything besides Amanda Seyfried, and that's very much coming to fruition. It's gotten blanked by every guild thus far. It didn't make one BAFTA longlist mention, despite there being fantastic work in this film in terms of production design and costume design and makeup, everything.
Period specific again.
And very period specific. It's beautiful work, and it's been omitted. And I think that just goes to show you how much the film is not resonating with the industry, unfortunately. And so that's an outlier that would also make perfect sense.
Exactly.
In this category.
No BAFTA mention, as you
Right.
said, right? No Costume Designers Guild.
And that's also another costume designer that has never been nominated for the Costume Designers Guild.
Right.
And I believe it's a costume designer whose work leans more international than it does domestic. I believe she was the same costume designer for The Zone of Interest, I believe.
But that's sort of the issue that's like plaguing a lot of the contenders in general in this category is that while the work is good, the work seems to be underseen, and the designers themselves seem to be a little bit underexposed in terms of the voter base in the branch. And so, I even with something like Marty Supreme, again, that guild snub I think is pretty major, and the fact that we haven't seen it before. Right now, the consensus is that Marty gets in, but we feel a little bit shaky on that. The problem is finding a substitute, right? And it would make sense for Marty to get in because, again, the DGA 5, it would mean sub out One Battle as a contemporary film and put in Wicked, which is a favorite here. And that makes sense. But then a scenario occurred to our head, which is it possible if this happens, which is if Colleen Atwood, who's really respected and has all these nominations and all these wins at the Oscars and at her guild, manages to be the favorite to win contemporary, and she's already listed, and people are, seeing that she's working on this film, but they have a bias against contemporary films. Does it possibly open a road, considering the competition we have, of a possibility where the designers who vote, who are part of this branch, could potentially prefer to nominate Colleen Atwood, right? But for her work on the musical Kiss of the Spider-Woman, right? Why? Because it's a period. It's period. It is a little bit more concentrated on how it's specifically designing costume for the main character, for the character played by Jennifer Lopez, the female character, but also Melina, for example. If you watch the final moment of that film, it's very difficult not to see how the costume design isn't really elaborate and really significant in telling the story, right, of the film. And so I do wonder if there's an opportunity here where, due to the competition, you could potentially see a surprise nomination from the winner of One Battle After Another in the contemporary section, but for the other title that they worked on. And so Colleen Atwood and Christine Cantella would end up being nominated for Kiss of the Spider-Woman instead. And they already have a guild nomination together exactly for their work on The Little Mermaid. And so they're not necessarily new. Besides Colleen Atwood, Christine isn't new either.
Well, again, Colleen Atwood is one of the most revered costume designers in the industry. I think she only trails someone like Sandy Powell by a couple of nominations. They're very fond of her work at the Academy. She has an incredible amount of nominations, and a large number of her nominations are for things like musicals.
Exactly.
And she has gotten in the past for musicals that are associated to Bill Condon.
Right.
So there's a partnership here that I think the costume designers are familiar with, that they appreciate.
Right. And this also that idea that, Bill Condon, he didn't work with Colleen on Dreamgirls, but Dreamgirls was nominated here. And just so that idea that a big sort of Technicolor musical from Bill Condon and Colleen Atwood is something that costume designers are going to pay more attention to, possibly a film that focuses on gender as much as this film does, is something that they're going to pay attention to. And so that idea popped into our head, whether that nomination for Colleen in One Battle and potential win for Colleen in One Battle at her guild could really just boost her chances of getting nominated for Kiss of the Spider-Woman instead. And I will say, again, I don't know if I mentioned already, but not listed at the BAFTA long list, Kiss of the Spider-Woman,
Right.
but it was not eligible.
Right. It didn't come out in
Exactly.
the
So
UK.
it's very much not like Hedda, where Hedda was eligible and
And it
missed.
didn't. Right.
Kiss not being there makes sense because it wasn't even eligible.
Right.
Now,
I mean, I will bring up that I think, you know, for me at least, it's undisputable that if we were able to somehow get all the members of the costume branch to see both films back to back, that there would be one that they would prefer for this nomination, and that would be Kiss of the Spider Woman. The question is, did enough voters see it? I mean, there's, you know, the film has underperformed. It's been underseen in general. And there's a very big question mark as to whether the studio even has the resources or had the resources to put it in front of voters' eyes.
right.
And that could be a huge reason why it gets blanked here. But it would make perfect sense in this category. And again, this is a collaboration that they're very much endeared by, they like. And it's incredible work. I mean, if you see the film, the amount of detail and splendor in these, throwback MGM musical set pieces is really beautiful to behold. And it's such a shame to think that it could go empty-handed, especially when there's an open spot, especially when the open spot favors someone like Colleen Atwood for a contemporary piece.
Exactly. But so isn't it interesting, the idea that like you have that little bit of bridge there? Also, I will say that something that should help Kiss of Spider Woman is that it's culturally diverse, right? It has these Spanish influence, it has these influences on old Hollywood also, right? But I think that's something that's going to pop out to them. Again, beyond that discussion it's having on gender, which I think is also going to pop out to them. The other thing is that like this category, as we said, tends to favor veterans. And so if you look at the list we've got right now, with Frankenstein, Hamnet, Sinners, and Wicked for Good, you got two veterans and two first-time nominees. The thing is, usually this category goes a minimum of 3. I think the last time they got 2 was happened to be, the pandemic year, right? Which was a complicated year.
Right.
But even in that pandemic year, for example, when you had the first-time nomination for Trish Somerville for Mank, or Bina Daigler for Mulan, or Massimo Perini for Pinocchio, they were nominated by the Guild.
Right.
And so just the idea that Ann Lee and Marty Supreme are not Guild nominees, that hurts already.
Yeah.
I mean, it helps that Hedda at least got that Guild nomination, and that sort of keeps it alive here. And I think Hedda's certainly a dark horse there. But again, a year where you have only 2 veterans is rare. And knowing that Colleen stands a good chance to win for one battle, I really do think that there is
an
opportunity here where we end up seeing Kiss of the Spider-Woman surprise and steal that 5th nomination. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like, when a costume designer is so well known, like Yako for her work in Mirror Mirror, or Sandy Powell in The Tempest, right? When Sandy Powell was able to get a nomination there for The Tempest, she's working with Julie Taymor, who costume designers also know. And so like, I just think the mix of what the film is about, the legacy of the project, Bill Condon, Colleen Atwood, Colleen being up for a bigger Best Picture movie, which has a contemporary bias, I see the pieces falling where this could happen. Again, those films that get in for a nomination, like Miyako would get in for Marty Supreme, that do not first get a nomination at their Guild, and they don't have any previous nominations at the Guild. Couple of titles are, for example, I Am Love, The Grandmaster. Those are international titles. And so that could happen here. And maybe there's an international contender that we're overlooking. But that being said, it's not impossible for a respected costume designer to still get in for a nomination here without the nomination from her Guild or from their Guild. And without even a nomination at a Guild like the Producers Guild Award. Like the Production Designers Guild. I remember in 2019, that was the last time when Jacqueline Durand was able to get in for Little Women, and Little Women got snubbed from the Costume Designers Guild and the Production Designers Guild. So I don't think the fact that Colleen was not listed for KISS, or that KISS wasn't listed in either guild, is completely detrimental, because the point is that it's a film that voters already had in the back of their mind as costume designers who are familiar with this kind of work and these artists, and that it's going to be front of mind when they see Colleen's name show up in the guild nominations, which they'll likely reference before submitting their final 5.
Right. And I mean, again, Colleen Atwood is royalty when it comes to costume designers. She has, I believe, 12 nominations for the Academy, 4 wins. Look at some of these wins/nominations. Into the Woods, a Nine, a Sweeney Todd, a Chicago. So this is very much, as you were saying, her element. The musical space, and at her guild, I believe she has like 20 nominations. So
Right.
she's certainly a favorite. Never bet against Colleen Atwood. And just so happens that, as you were saying, the pieces here are suspicious. And it would be a shame to overlook Kiss of Spider-Woman, I think personally, because the work is just that good and that beautiful. So let's see. Let's hope that we're right there.
Right. So then our final 5 predicted films for best costume design are
Sinners, Wicked for Good, Frankenstein, Hamnet, and Kiss of the Spider-Woman. Okay, and our next category that we'll be looking at, giving our final predictions, is production design.
I think this is like its sister category, costume design. A lot of it feels kind of firm, but then we enter this one tiny little loophole, which can be sort of deceptively simple. And I think, again, upon further examination, shows that it's really complicated. And it's going to be sort of the line between, how many you get right and how many you get wrong. Let's start out the top. Films that we're very, very sure are going to show up, very confident it's going to show up.
That would be Sinners.
Right. Hannah for Sinners is going to come back. She did not get an eye for Wakanda Forever.
But she won for Black Panther.
She's the winner of Black Panther, so she should easily be in here. Best Picture movie, that's an easy one.
Frankenstein, I think, is the favorite for this category as well.
Tamara Devereaux got nominated for Nightmare Alley. Another Best Picture movie. Maybe the favorite to win here, possible. Yeah. What else?
Another film that I think has a very good chance of showing up here is Hamnet.
Yeah, Fiona Crombie, who is a previous nominee for The Favorite. I think, again, like costume design, it's very modest. It's not, as elaborate or intricate as the work in, for example, Shakespeare in Love, but it is effective, right? And it does tell the story, and it is a previous nominee and a Best Picture nominee, so I think you and I are certainly expecting it to show up here.
Right. And I think one of the other very... a contender that I think looks very safe here is Marty Supreme, by the legendary Jack Fisk, who is the production designer. Let's put it this way: when Jack Fisk is in a Best Picture heavy film, he gets nominated.
Right.
Period.
That's usually the case. And to add on to that, Jack Fisk has always managed to score a nomination for a film that he was shortlisted at his guild.
Right.
So Marty Supreme did get the Production Designers Guild nomination, unlike the Costume Designers Guild. And so that's a really good sign. And I think you were pointing out the idea that, thank God he got it, because again, there's just an approach to Marty.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Like we were talking about in costume design, because of the style of the film, you don't necessarily get to sort of swim and just immerse yourself in the environment, even though it's very well done. A very beautiful work by Jack Fisk. And as you were saying, there's a globe-trotting aspect to it that I think only adds to its value. But like costume design, it suffers from not being able, by the approach stylistically.
Yeah. The Safdie approach was just sort of like a more chaotic,
psychological. Put you in the psychological space of the character.
So I think it's just not conventionally what is rewarded in this category. That said, the Guild nominations should see him through. The Best Picture nomination should see him through. So that makes a list of Sinners, Frankenstein, Hamnet, Marty Supreme. Again, we're getting very close to the DJ5.
Yeah.
The only film missing is One Battle After Another, who is coming from a previous nominee. But again, contemporary films, they can struggle here. And the ambiguous space that One Battle is occurring in could be something that just turns off this branch.
Right. It's obviously taking place in present day / maybe even a little bit into the future. But again, it's nebulous.
Right.
And I will say that, I would feel, or I feel a little bit more positive about its chances to surprise in costume design than I do its chances to surprise here in production design.
Right. Although, again, usually they are a pair.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at some of the other contenders that we can choose from to fill in that 5th spot, over at the Production Designers Guild, you had a nomination a surprise nomination, welcome nomination for Phoenician Scheme from Adam Stockhausen, previous nominee. Really nice to see there. Again, another film that missed the Costume Designers Guild nomination for Milena Canonero, who, again, has gotten in by herself. So could she crash the costume design nomination? Possibly, except there's an issue with both Adam Stockhausen's chances and Milena's chances, which is that at the Academy, Wes Anderson films have been all or nothing. Despite their elaborate designs, the only one to get in is the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is the Best Picture movie. And so just the idea of Adam getting in there, sneaking in and getting a nomination for the work on Budapest feels really, really far. Because usually, like I said, with Wes, you either fell in love with his films and they showed up everywhere, or they don't show up at all, right? And this was sort of, again, a muted response when it came out. Didn't make a lot of money here or overseas. And so I think that really hampers the film's chances. Also not a BAFTA long list nominee. Over on the fantasy, I mentioned, over on the fantasy side, you have what I suspect are going to be our two most likely contenders. And that is, you have a nomination for Avatar, Fire and Ash, and Wicked for Good. Alongside them, there's a lot of celebrated work with Fantastic Four, which I have to mention, also made the BAFTA long list. Mickey 17 made the BAFTA long list. Superman is there as well. On the contemporary side, you have One Battle, which is on the long list. Bugonia got nominated at the Guild, on the long list as well. F1, Mission Impossible, Wake Up Dead Man. But I think our debate here is between which of the two BAFTA long-listed films, which of the two Guild-nominated films, Avatar or Wicked, can edge out the other to score the fifth spot, right? Is that what you're thinking as well?
100%. And it's not an easy battle. On one hand, the work in Wicked for Good is still very elaborate and well done. He was just nominated here. The production designer, Nathan Crowley was just nominated here last year.
First win.
Right. And I will say that there is a pattern that his films tend to, when they get nominated for production design and they're part of these elaborate sort of films, tends to get nominated alongside a visual effects nomination. What that happened last year, Wicked got both a visual effects nomination and a production design nomination. So in a way, if you're predicting Wicked to be nominated here, it's like you're also predicting it to get nominated for visual effects. It would be odd for it to be here and not in visual effects. Again, Nathan Crowley's work tends to, when they're part of these bigger budget spectacles, they tend to go hand in hand, a production design nomination with a visual effects nomination. So that's something to consider. And then there's something very important to consider about Avatar.
I think the thing about Avatar is, if costume design and production design are sister categories, then production design and visual effects are cousin categories. And there should be sort of a film bridging the two, at least one. For example, last year you did see Wicked have that spot in production design and visual effects, but with diminishing returns and with just the idea that Dune Part 2 is able to miss makeup and costume design last year, the argument really exists where can Wicked really survive, Wicked for Good survive nominations in both costume and production design? You would imagine the one that's further ahead is possibly costume design, because again, the field of it, but also just the idea of designing around these two female characters, these fantasy worlds. It's a little bit more prioritized in costumes than it is in production design. But the other thing is that Wicked, I don't know if it has as strong a shot this year of getting into visual effects. At the same time, their Avatar, Fire and Ash, is certainly a strong contender to get nominated and win visual effects. Way of Water got the nomination at the Production Designers Guild, got the Oscar nomination for production design, and won visual effects. It very much fits the mold of that film that bridges the two. The only big problem is that it missed the BAFTA long list mention, and I think that's really important, because I think the BAFTA long list
has had a good track record of having all the nominees, all the eventual nominees for production design in their long list.
They've been pretty much on the money. And so does that omission sort of spell trouble for Avatar, which in general, we know that Fire and Ash is having trouble this season, with the PGA snub and snubs elsewhere. We saw it do well at the Visual Effects Society. So we know it's going to win that category.
Yeah, so that's the other thing to consider, that if you see the trend is that the visual effects winner, when they like to include the visual effects winner when they can, in the production design category.
I kind of remember that the last visual effects winner to knock it in here was actually pretty recently for The Creator. But even then, they were able to have Napoleon sort of adopt Napoleon as that film that bridged visual effects and production design, right? So at minimum, we should have one film bridging it. I think the last time that we had a production design category list of nominees, 5 nominees, that didn't include a single film from the visual effects category was 2016. So like nearly a decade ago. And it was an off year. That's just not the case. If you look at the visual effects winner that year, The Jungle Book, it didn't get nominated at the Production Designers Guild. Avatar Fire and Ash did. And again, it's expected, I think, to win this category. And the winners of the fantasy category typically tend to get nominated. And so the guild nomination and potential win favors Avatar. The crossover between visual effects and production design favors Avatar. Diminishing returns doesn't necessarily favor Avatar Fire and Ash, and the BAFTA long list snub certainly is working against it. So we're kind of stuck in this like middle place of what do we do? Do we give more nominations to Wicked, which is against diminishing returns? Do we give more nominations to Avatar, which is against diminishing returns? Do we sort of buck the idea that the BAFTA has been pretty accurate on the production designers when listing production design nominees on the long list? Or do we stick with the idea that the winner of the Production Designers Guild for Fantasy should make it in here? A few other contenders that made it in the BAFTA included Battle of a Small Player, and I believe
Downton Abbey.
Downton Abbey is in costume.
That's right, yes.
But so maybe one of those costumes people can make it in here, maybe. But I doubt it. I mean, Bugonia, one battle to another. Again, those contemporary pieces struggle. So it's really, I think it really comes down to these two. And I don't know what you're thinking is the best way for it to break.
Well, I mean, I think that I really leaned on the idea that there should certainly be diminishing returns for both films. In Avatar's case, we're already starting at 4, which is a pretty low number anyway.
From Way of Water.
From Way of Water, exactly, in 2022. So diminishing returns should be less than 4. Could it just be 1? And visual effects, I mean, that could happen. But in its favor, it stands to win that category. I think there's very little doubt that it will win that category. On the opposite end, I think that Wicked for Good should have somewhat of a dramatic shift and have much less nominations than the first one. So if the first one is 10, I'm thinking that 3 or 4 is the tops for Wicked for Good. And I don't think one of its strongest categories is visual effects. I actually think there's some visual effects in the film that I wasn't quite fond of, and that I would think that the visual effects branch is not going to respond as favorably as the first one.
Yeah.
And I think that affects my impression that it'll get nominated to production design.
Right.
You know, some visual effects artists might feel that, you know, nominating the first one was enough.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to nominate for the second one. And I think that already hurts the bid for production design for Wicked for Good. Meanwhile, we still have Avatar possibly winning its category in the Production Designers Guild and certainly very favorably winning visual effects at the Academy.
Right.
So in a way, between the two of them, I can't help but feel that the edge is a little bit for Avatar 3, Fire and Ash. And that possibly the diminishing returns for Avatar Fire and Ash is we go from 4 to 3, visual effects, sound, production design, or even 2, visual effects and production design.
Yeah, because sound is not necessarily sewn up yet. But I do like, you know, when you take a macro look at it, these two sister categories, one of them gets Wicked in, and the other one subs it out for Avatar. I do like that sort of idea. I don't know if you like that also, where instead of you see both of them show up in each category, you sort of see the populist vote break for Wicked in one and the populist vote break for Avatar on the other. I like that, especially considering these are two movies, again, two kind of sister movies that have just underperformed this year and didn't get into the PGA. I like that looks symmetrical. I think, again, we shouldn't look over the idea that, like in costume, you could very well just see the DGA 5 here. And going against that is that doesn't happen very often. Same thing.
Minus one battle after another.
Minus one. Well, again, if one battle after another manages to get both and Marty manages to get both, you could potentially see the DGA 5 there. It's not impossible. In fact, I think it's more likely this year than in other years when you had more contemporary pieces that were not going to get to the largest hall of the day. So I do want to like put that out there, but at the same time, I also want to say that like it's not often that the categories should perfectly mirror each other. It's usually not that boring. Usually you'll see 3 movies overlap, which is what we got right now: Frankenstein, Sinners, and Hamnet, right? Sort of dominating these 2 races, and then 2 movies differ, right? You have Jack Fisk and the James Cameron spectacle. In the other, you have the 2 musicals,
Right.
which I think are preferred in costume design. And I
Right.
think that makes sense to us on a macro level and sort of taking a wider view of Academy Award history.
Right.
Right. And so I think with that, what are our final predictions?
So our final predictions for production design are Sinners, Frankenstein, Hamnet, Marty Supreme, and Avatar: Fire and Ash. Okay, and the next category that we'll be looking at is Best Cinematography. Again, we'll start off with the films that should be very much favorited to get in here, and that is Sinners. Should definitely get a nomination here. In fact, it's probably the front runner to win this category. It'd be one of the few female cinematographers to win this category.
I think it'd be the first to win,
female,
and one of the few nominees to get in.
Right, which would be historic, and obviously that's very much going in its favor. One battle after another should comfortably get in here as well, and Train Dreams should get in here as well. Now,
all first timers, I'll say that.
All first timers, and we're going to get into that a little bit. We shouldn't have a list of all first timers first. I'll just say that. The consensus right now is that Sinners, One Battle, Train Dreams, Frankenstein, and Hamnet are the favorites to get on for cinematography. If you look at the precursors, they've routinely been the 5 that have been cited. Train Dreams, interestingly enough, won the Critics' Choice the other day.
Surprisingly.
Right. I think that when we look at the ASC, the American Society of Cinematographers, you'll see that there's one very big snub, and that is Hamnet.
The Guild, yeah.
Yeah, the Guild. Sinners, One Battle After Another, Train Dreams, and Frankenstein managed to get a nomination, and instead of Hamnet, we have Marty Supreme. That's very interesting. Obviously, as I said, Hamnet was favored to get in here. Lucas Zhao has gotten into this guild twice. One for as a nominee, and he won for Cold War. I believe we mentioned that. And the other was a Spotlight Award that he was mentioned for Ida, which got nominated in 2014.
Right.
Now, the miss for Hamnet here, I think, is significant. And I think it points to, as we were saying at the top of the show, that it's the weakest category. It's the weakest contender in this category. A few things to look at. When we looked at the past for cinematography, this is a guild that does pretty well in terms of overlap with the Academy in this category. They usually get minimum 4 out of 5 correct. There's been, in the last 10 years, let's say, one instance where they only got 3 correct, and that was quite recently in 2022 when they nominated both The Batman and Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah.
And instead, the Academy chose to nominate Tar and All Quiet on the Western Front.
Right.
But that's a rarity.
Mm-hmm.
They usually do pretty well, and they usually line up pretty well. Last year, they missed Amelia Perez, and they had a list of 7, technically, because they included Conclave, Complete Unknown, and Wicked Part 1, none of which made it. And instead Amelia Perez did. That being said, this is also a guild that doesn't tend to favor international films, so that's not very surprising.
I remember that Amelia Perez didn't make it into the guild, as you said, and also Tar didn't make it into the film. So like not being part of the final 5 doesn't necessarily kill you, right? But I will say like it's worked much better for international titles, and like usually you'll see international titles in here, but that's like not the case this year, right?
Right. Exactly. And the mention for Darius Kanji is both surprising and not very surprising. Not very surprising because this is a guild that very much embraces Darius Kanji's work. He's one of our great cinematographers. He's very revered in the industry. He has, I believe, 4 nominations at the guild dating back to 1996. 7 was nominated. Evita was nominated. In 2022, we had Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, and then just most recently, Marty Supreme. He also had a special mention in the Spotlight Award for The Immigrant. In 2015, he won a special award alongside Bardo in 2023. So they very much have embraced his work. and he's a legendary cinematographer who, oddly enough, only has 2 Oscar nominations.
Right.
1997 Evita and Bardo.
Especially for someone like who was working in the 90s, like alongside Roger Deakins and Lubeski, you know, he doesn't have as many mentions as they do.
Right, exactly. And so in a way, the Academy is behind the Cinematographers Guild in recognizing his work. So it's not surprising that he was mentioned here by them. Again, they embrace him often. And it's surprising that the Academy is so late. But it's also surprising because if you see Marty Supreme, you know, it's well shot, it looks good, you know, but again, as we were mentioning with production design and with costume design, the stylistic approach, you know, very heavy close-ups, you know, doesn't necessarily let you, you know, sort of dissolve or immerse yourself in the photography either.
The composition,
the lighting, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an effect that they've done with Darius Kanji, the collaboration, Safdie brothers and Darius Kanji before. You saw it on Uncut Gems, and it works for their aesthetic, it works for their style, it works for the film, the worlds that they're creating. But it doesn't necessarily, I mean, I wouldn't think it's something that leaps out to a cinematographer.
Yeah.
And yet it got mentioned here for the cinematographers.
I was going to say, I can't really think of a kind of a parallel comparison that has gotten into this guild before. And so it's kind of, I think that's significant.
I do too. And so that I think is surprising, but I think it's worth really paying attention to. Because if you also look at their past, you see that this is a guild, and it's also an Oscar. It's also an Oscar category that likes to include, you know, for lack of a better phrase, you know, heavy hitters. You know, these very big figures in the cinematography field. You know, these are you know, iconic and legendary cinematographers. It is a category that is very welcoming and very embracing of those figures. And this year we have a lot of first timers.
Right.
We have in Sinners a first timer. We have Michael Bowman for One Bite After Another, a first timer. We have Adolfo for Train Dreams, a first timer. And then we have Frankenstein, which possibly Frankenstein. In terms of, you know, the ASC and what's the favorites. Who would be who is not a first timer, has gotten in twice before with Guillermo del Toro films. This would be his 3rd collaboration. And in a way, it's kind of weird to imagine Dan Laustin getting a 3rd nomination for Guillermo del Toro film, and Darius Kanji still only has 2.
Right.
You know, that's kind of weird. And it's as weird as thinking that Lucas Zhao for Hamnet would get possibly a 3rd nomination by the Academy when someone of Darius Kanji's stature, again, only has 2.
Right.
So I think there's an issue here.
Right.
There's an issue that is problematic, and that's that these last 2 spots they feel like they're between Frankenstein, Marty Supreme, and Hamnet, but you got to give the edge a little bit to Marty Supreme.
Right.
Because again, this category is missing these, you know, larger figures. Think about how last year,
like Ed Lockman.
Ed Lockman got in last year, and you know, that's a pattern that you'll see. You'll see these figures be ever present in the cinematography category.
Right.
And really, Darius Kanji is one of the few of that stature that, you know, makes sense to get into this category.
Among the contenders this year.
Exactly. And so in a way, I want to say that he has that 4th spot before either Frankenstein or Hamnet do.
Wow.
You know, which again is weird, because I don't think, again, it's that I would lead with the foot of cinematography for Marty Supreme, but I think that's why he got nominated here. I think that's why he made it into this surprise. He made it into this ASC list.
Right. It's almost like you're saying it's easier to imagine Darius getting a 3rd nomination first before either Lucas Zal or Dan Laustin.
Right.
And then I think that makes a lot of sense. So if that's the case, I think, where do you lie between, does the last spot go to Lucas Zal, who potentially maybe got overlooked for Zone of Interest, which was the Best Picture movie, or Dan Laustin, who would get a 3rd nomination, and all his nominations come exclusively from Guillermo del Toro films, which is not always the most common. Like, I think of someone like Matthew Libatique, who has 3 nominations, right? But he's worked with Bradley Cooper, he's worked with Darren Aronofsky. So where do you lean?
So yeah, in a way, it's like a race between, does Dan Laustin get his 3rd nomination with a Guillermo del Toro collaboration, or does Lucas Zhao get a third nomination. Who gets a third nomination first?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you look at the filmography of Dan Lauston, he's a Danish cinematographer, but he's actually been working for a long time in the industry, and he's worked in a lot of American films, not just foreign language films. And so, you know, you saw him in the John Wick films, you saw him in collaborations with Guillermo del Toro, you saw him in some lesser films that not necessarily worth his talent. But you know, he's been a constant presence. He has a very big filmography. Whereas when you look at Lucas Zhao, he has less credits, and he's still, again, he's a Polish cinematographer, Lucas Zhao, and I think his work is still leans more international than it does American.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a factor to consider. And I also think that there's an aspect to Frankenstein and sort of the ornate production of it all that I think lends itself to possibly, you know, be something that the cinematographers might be a little bit more attracted to than maybe the more nuanced approach that Chloe Zhao has with her film.
Right.
Which again, it's well photographed, it's really beautiful to look at, but it doesn't have that kind of, you know, majestic, ornate sort of factor going for it, in terms of its scope.
Yeah.
Which I think is something else to consider when you're debating who they would lean towards.
I think something that comes up is the idea of, do you think it'll be a factor in terms of a positive or a negative? The idea that Frankenstein is coming from Netflix, and Netflix pretty much seems assured a nomination with Train Dreams.
Right.
You know, do you think that's a complication, or do you actually think that's an asset?
Well, we know that Netflix does well in this category, but you're right in that, it's not often. In fact, I don't know if it's ever happened that they've been nominated twice.
No, certainly, because I remember Ed Lockman.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the reverse.
Right.
They tend to do so well in this category that they often get nominated more than once.
So that maybe could be.
I think that's a factor to consider. Yes,
yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
that may be a tiebreaker.
Right, and something else to consider is that there's a interesting correlation between Jack Fisk and his production design correlating really well with cinematography nominations. In that when Jack Fisk gets nominated at the Academy thus far, that film was also listed in cinematography.
Right. So I mean, yeah. So his nominations are for Killers of the Flower Moon, There Will Be Blood, and The Revenant, and so they do get both a production design nomination and a cinematography nomination.
Right. It's possible for a film that Jack Fisk was a part of to get a cinematography nomination and to still not get a production design nomination. But when he gets nominated, Jack Fisk, those films tend to be cinematography nominees as well.
Right. It usually hasn't existed. I guess it has yet to exist where Jack Fisk makes the final five in his category of production design, and cinematographers don't revere the work enough that it doesn't make the top five for cinematography. I think, for example, what you're saying is like in 2005, when Emmanuel Lubezki was nominated for shooting The New World, right, for Terrence Malick, it was revered enough there to score that single nomination, that sole nomination. And although Jack Fisk worked on it,
right,
he missed the nomination.
Right.
And so that has happened. But whenever Jack Fisk has shown up on a short list for production design, it's because that movie is popular enough to make it into cinematography and popular enough to make it into Best Picture and Best Director and all these other categories.
Right.
And so we're sort of saying that, again, that solidifies Marty's position that you can't move either spots 1 through 3 between Train Dreams, Sinners, and
One Battle.
And one bat after another. And so I think at the end we're saying that just the credits and maybe Guillermo del Toro, it makes the branch lean toward Frankenstein.
Oh yeah, and also Netflix.
Right.
As you were saying, the scope of it all, the ornateness of it all. I think all of that leans heavily on Frankenstein. And I should also point out that you mentioned at the top of the show that Lucas Zhao hasn't had success for films not in black and white, oddly enough.
Right.
Both Ida and Cold War were black and white. Maybe that played a factor in the appreciation that the guild had, or that the cinematographers have towards his work, possibly. Right. In a way, I also think that Guillermo del Toro has already established himself to be a filmmaker that cinematographers kind of are drawn to and pay attention to. And I don't know that Chloe Zhao is there. I will say that Chloe Zhao's first film, Nomadland, did land a cinematography nomination. But if you've seen that film and you also understand that it came out during the pandemic, you know, it's not the kind of film that you would peg to be a clear fire, you know, nominee for cinematography.
Absolutely.
It just benefited from the year that it was in.
Right.
And so her approach to, you know, her cinematic canvas is not where, you know, cinematographers are at with Guillermo del Toro and his films.
Right.
So I think they're more attracted to, you know, that loudness that's in the Guillermo del Toro films. And I think they might be a little bit less attracted to, you know, the sort of nuanced, you know, specificity, but, you know, sort of spiritualness that is in the, you know, visual images that are in Chloe Zhao's films.
I think that's very possible. I mean, you have to remember that Guillermo del Toro's film Pan's Labyrinth won this category back in 2006 for his big breakthrough, and it didn't even get a Guild nomination, right? And so he has a history now of showing up, or his films rather have a history of showing up in the cinematography category, whether it's Pan's Labyrinth, Nightmare Alley, Shape of Water, and now I think Frankenstein seems likely to fit those shoes.
Yeah,
right,
100%.
And so it goes potentially 5 out of 5
with the
Guild,
ASC,
which does happen.
which happens often, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like that this list is missing, you know, again, a big veteran presence, someone who is considered, you know, of a high status, high stature in the field of cinematography. I mean, again, Dan Lauston, it would be his third nomination, but I'm talking about someone who's been working for a very long time and is very revered by the Cinematographers Guild and department. I feel like that this list is missing without Darius Khondji. We're missing that.
Yeah.
And so I like his inclusion in it as well. So I think our final predictions for cinematography are Sinners, One Battle After Another, Train Dreams, Frankenstein, and Marty Supreme.
All right, so let's jump now to, I think, what we agree is going to be one of the make or break categories for this year's Oscar predictions. You know, every year there's one of those where it's just tough to get a handle on, and I think this year
there's a group of those.
There's always a group of those. There's always like a 2 or 3, maybe even 5 of those versus more steady categories. I think this year we are in store for a very complicated projection for the nominees in Best Film Editing. And we'll start by there's, you know, 2 films that I think you and I agree, like in almost every other category, are further ahead than everyone else. And so we're fully expecting to see One Battle After Another get in here, and Sinners get in here. Both Best Picture movies, both first-time nominees. After that, it gets a little bit shakier.
I think those are the only locks.
I think those are the only locks. Let's take a minute and look at who the BAFTA listed on their long list. It included 28 Years Later, which did fantastic, which was I'm happy to see. Bugonia, again, was listed there. F1, Frankenstein, Hamnet, A House of Dynamite, Marty Supreme, One Battle, and Sinners, of course, and Weapons, which was kind of surprising. And so looking at that, where do we start to sort of decipher where the rest of this list can go? I think you and I sort of started with this very popular idea. Of course, the base for everything, and again, we're seeing the narrative, and we'll see what happens on announcement day, but this could very well just be the DGA 5. Could it not?
Right.
And that's One Battle After Another, Sinners, Marty Supreme, Hamnet, and Frankenstein. Except most people have had an issue with that, right? And what has most people's issue been?
Well, the big issue here is that this category, and I think people have been, you know, understanding of this category needs at least one veteran in this category, someone who's been here before. And if you consider One Battle After Another, Sinners, and other films that people have been floating around like Hamnet and Marty Supreme,
DGA 5.
Yeah. Even something like Weapons, you know, which again made the BAFTA long list. Those are films that are newbies. They have no veteran that's been here before, and this category should have a veteran. In fact, the last time that there was no veteran in this category was in 1999.
I will say, yeah. I mean, in 1999, they nominated American Beauty, The Cider House Rules, The Sixth Sense, The Insider, and the win went to The Matrix, a film that was nominated for sound. All of them were freshman nominees, and they had never been honored before. Interestingly enough, there were veterans to nominate. So this branch back in 1999, more than 25 years ago, made a very conscious decision to say, I'm going to leave the veterans out, because there was a veteran editor, possibly the GOAT in this category, Walter Murch, for The Talented Mr. Ripley. But by the time nominations came out, the stock for Talented Mr. Ripley was so low that it didn't score a nomination. But there was also a veteran editor for Milos Forman's film Man on the Moon. And so you had films to consider. It could have made the odd solo nomination just for a veteran, or a veteran could have shown up in one or two categories. Ripley was nominated, even if it wasn't widely nominated. But they consciously chose not to include them, and to just include first-time nominees who all repped, Best Picture movies, or, what certainly would have been a Best Picture movie had there been 10 in The Matrix in 1999. So it's not
rare.
impossible.
Right, but
it's very rare. But you had to go back all the way to 1999.
Right.
But it's not impossible.
Right. And I think one of the issues is, okay, so I think the first place we go to is, what is this pool of quote unquote veterans that can even make the list?
Exactly.
If we look at the BAFTA long list, we look at what veterans were cited there. That would leave us with 28 Years Later, Bugonia, F1, and A House of Dynamite. Something that did not make the short list in the BAFTA, and actually did not make the short list last year either, was Wicked. And Wicked is another veteran that, if somehow Wicked managed to get a nomination in editing, a second nomination in editing after part one,
right,
they would be considered a veteran. And, again, the BAFTA missed them last year. Mm-hmm. So it's not odd that they're not there this year either. That being said, it was very weird for Wicked to even get that first one.
Right.
And so, to get it for, I think, a lesser film would be odd. Mm-hmm. So if we focus on those 4 films, correct?
Right.
It's tough, because a film like Bugonia has been doing pretty well in terms of precursors and being mentioned in the industry. Again, it got that BAFTA long list mention. It got the PGA mention. It actually got several mentions at BAFTA. And F1 has been getting mentions as well, at the BAFTA, at the Sound Designers Guild, at the PGA. I think both of those films stand to get nominations at the Ace Eddie,
right?
When the nominations come out. So I think that if we're going to contemplate a veteran spot, I think we'd be contemplating between the two of them.
Right. And I don't think that's a bad way to go. At one point, A House of Dynamite sounded good. They even gave it that solo nomination, the Critics' Choice Award, which was kind of ridiculous. This category, we talk about sibling categories. Film editing and sound tend to be cousin categories.
They speak to each other.
They speak to each other as both occurring in the post-production phase of making a film. And so, having F1, for example, be such a formidable contender for sound welcomes the idea that it can pop up in film editing. I think where you and I go back and forth is, yes, for the past 20 plus years, we've had a veteran, but there's also been a little bit of a recent trend among the film editing branch where if you examine their nominees and you analyze them, something that becomes really apparent is that they're really siding with films that are Best Picture nominees, that are acting nominees, that are writing nominees. And so they're kind of weaning off the idea of including pure spectacle here. And so, for example, I'll say as an a good comparison, Joseph Kosinski's Top Gun Maverick was nominated here,
yeah,
right? And that's a fantastic parallel to F1,
yeah,
except that Maverick was a Best Picture nominee, which I guess F1 isn't completely out of the woods on yet. It could still happen, but it was also a screenplay nominee. And I think we're saying that bridge is too far,
right,
for F1 to cross.
Right.
And aside from that, what you'll often get here are acting nominees. And so we know that F1 won't be crossing that bridge. But I do wonder if in everyone's concentration to search out for a veteran, they're overlooking the fact that this branch, with nominations, for example, surprise nominations for nominees like Anatomy of a Fall, nominees like Tar, where their focus is on story and performance, and not necessarily spectacle. Even like that surprise nomination or possibly unexpected nomination for Wicked last year, it had acting nominees. It was a picture nominee and it had acting nominees.
Right.
So is that the Achilles heel for a movie like F1?
Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up an excellent point. I think where we have an issue is that we are so limited with the contenders to consider for, that veteran spot, that, even if you were to consider a film like Bugonia, for example, which could get an acting nomination or two, could get very likely to get a screenplay nomination, maybe even gets Best Picture. I don't feel that editors, that's going to be the film that they're most drawn to, I guess I would say. I mean, it is well edited and it's one of my favorite films of the year, but it's very well done. But for some reason, I'm feeling that it's not, as attention calling for them, the editing work in that film, as I guess I would think that a film like F1 would be for them. And films about, racing do have a history of doing well in this category, and so I just don't think that we have a lot of great options. If the second best option is Begonia, this editor was nominated most recently just a couple years ago, I believe, for Poor Things.
Right.
Is it too soon for a nomination? Again, that film was a huge juggernaut, which got double digits. Begonia is not going to be that.
Yeah.
Do they make that room, for that veteran spot for a film like Begonia? It feels off to me.
I understand that, and again, he was nominated first for The Favorite, which is again another double digit film, again another fantasy sort of period film, which Begonia is not, and it's not going to get anywhere near double digits. That being said, I think the best comparison you have for this branch feeling the same or having the same reasons to include F1, I think the closest you can go to is the nomination for Baby Driver, which is the last time I think that a film is able to be nominated for this category in film editing without ever getting nods for screenplay, acting, and picture. And again, most of those are a bridge too far for F1. And so that being the case, I mean, funnily enough, they're both driving movies, right? And so maybe there's a little bit of a secret formula there.
Right.
I think it helps that we're talking about a veteran like Stephen Marion, who's a winner for Traffic, who's was mentioned for The Revenant, known for Babel. So like he has a reputation of doing these serious-minded projects that have these multiple points of view, and also these sort of auteur projects. So maybe they won't feel like too bad about nominating a spectacle film, knowing that he's, a very sort of serious-minded artist who will take on, more prestigious films in the future.
Right.
But I do think that's a little bit odd, and I do wonder if in everyone's focus to fill out the spot with a veteran, if they aren't overlooking a greater trend. Something else that I think does come up for me, at least, is the idea that, I always go back to the surprise nominees here and what they can reveal about the branch. And I go to, for example, Amelia Perez, and I go to Anatomy of a Fall, and I go to Tar. And I do wonder, again, as you've said in other categories, are we getting more international here?
Right.
And not only is the Begonia veteran editor Yorgos an international pick, but, what about Sentimental Value getting in here?
Right. I think you bring up an excellent point, and we've discussed it. And it's that, again, we are starting to see more of a foreign presence in all categories, including editing. In fact, you just saw it last year with Amelia Perez and the year before that with Anatomy of a Fall. And so what I don't like about and to your point of editors probably or very possibly prioritizing performance and storytelling more than spectacle, Sentimental Value is a perfect fit for that because of its very strong acting and its storytelling. However, both Anatomy of a Fall and Amelia Perez were mentioned, for example, at the European Film Awards. And this year, Sentimental Value did really well at the European Film Awards. I don't know the number exactly, but I think
it was like 8.
Yeah, a good amount, and yet was not nominated for Best Editing. That calls out to me, as possibly this being a foreign language film, that the editing is not, as attention calling for editors at large, internationally and domestic, as films like Amelia Paris and Anatomy of a Fall. I think that's something to deeply consider. Meanwhile, a film like Begonia, which has an international appeal, did manage to get nominated at the European Film Awards, did manage to get a BAFTA long list mention, is a veteran, so there's more, oddly enough, going for Begonia than there is for Sentimental Value.
Even on the international side.
Yeah, exactly. I know that if you see Sentimental Value, I saw it recently again, I do feel there's a lot of cut to blacks, and Joachim Trier, the way he kind of fashions his films have this sort of very fluid aesthetic and feel to it. I don't know if that's something that would be an attraction for editors or a detraction. I'm not sure. But I do know that the imprint that a film like Tar had in its editing in these other precursors along the way, it hasn't really existed for a film like Sentimental Value. It hasn't really gotten cited for its editing, in critics groups and bigger awards groups. And a film like Tar, which surprised many when it got nominated for editing, still had a little bit bigger of a footprint. I think that's something to consider as well.
I mean, the thing I do like about Sentimental Value is that the editor has been working for 20 years, a little bit more than 20 years, and that they have branched out into other films. So you're talking about the same editor, not just of a lot of Joachim Trier's films, which again, they tend to reward. So I remember when they nominated the editor, I believe, for Amelia Perez, they have a long history of working with Jacques Audiard. And so this is very much an editor who's worked throughout the career of Joachim Trier, much like the editor of Ryan Coogler's Sinners, who's going to get in this year. But he's also worked on titles, for example, like The Apprentice, which was nominated last year, and like Beginners, which was a winner in 2011. Right. And at one point was even involved in the editing of the Independence Day sequel. And so I do wonder if his name isn't familiar enough to members of the branch where they're going to maybe consider putting him in if the best veteran we have is something that we haven't been leaning towards for a while.
Right.
At one point, I remember some people were bringing up the idea of it was just an accident getting in here, and I thought that was an impossibility. But I do think that Olivier has the editor of Sentimental Value, does have the filmography, the resume to back up a possible surprise nomination. Now, on the negative side, something that I didn't like beyond the European Film Award snub that you mentioned was that it was not listed at the BAFTA long list for editing, which I thought could have been, really telling. Because
which I believe both Anatomy of a Fall and Amelia Paris were.
As well as I believe Tar was not listed. But you're right. Anatomy of a Fall was listed at the BAFTA long list, as was Amelia Perez. And even Tar, which was not listed. Tar was listed in categories like sound and cinematography, and Sentimental Value didn't really go past casting.
Yeah, it kind of didn't do so well.
Yeah.
In long list, both American and British.
And especially just the idea that the British long list, having possibly a little bit more of an international footprint, that they still weren't able to put him in. And again, for example, Olivier is the editor of The Apprentice, and The Apprentice was all over the long lists in the BAFTA last year. Remember when The Apprentice was listed as one of the best, one of the 10 finalists for best films at the BAFTA? Yeah. And so it kind of, I think, is maybe a little even more damning that they couldn't find room for Olivier for Sentimental Value on this list.
I think on the plus side, we've seen a trend that the nominees for best editing tend to be PGA nominees.
Yeah.
Correct? And so on the plus side, Sentimental Value did manage to squeak in there into the PGA 10, which, I think gives it some more validity, the possibility that it could possibly sneak into editing. But I don't like it getting snubbed in these other places.
Right. So I think beyond...
Something that popped into my head right now is, do you think, with this idea of emphasis on performance, could that benefit a film like A House of Dynamite? Because it's such a cast ensemble driven film, and tension is such an important aspect of that film as well. and maybe they favor something like that, even if it's a solo nom for editing.
I mean, I think it's fascinating, but I would have thought it had a better shot if it was shortlisted for sound at the Oscars, and it was not. And again, these are cousin categories. Now, it's not unheard of for a film to get like an editing nomination and nothing else. I remember a similar scenario occurring in 1993 for like The Commitments, but it doesn't tend to happen. If it does happen, I think it's an extreme scenario, which would be very funny. They are veterans and they're very well rewarded. You know, Kirk Baxter obviously winning a lot of Academy Awards of his work with David Fincher. So I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility, but I do think it's unlikely.
Unlikely. And, you know, speaking of other foreign films, because again, there has been in the last few years, you know, some kind of presence of international in the five. You know, when we look at other contenders like The Secret Agent, which is really well edited, this was just an accident. You mentioned it. No Other Choice, SIRÀT, none of those made the PGA, obviously.
Right.
And I think that lessens their case as well. It's a weird scenario where, in terms of international, and there should be, I feel like it feels right to include some sort of international-ness in this category, internationality. Sentimental Value is the best choice,
Right.
but it's missing key things that other previous heavy hitter international films that end up making it to this category. It's missing some of those things.
Right. But I will say at the same time, like I remember like in 2022, like an international contender they decided not to nominate was All Quiet on the Western Front. And I think that was very much a decision to, I would rather include sort of the psychological discipline of Tar, which was not listed at BAFTA, than to include sort of the maybe excess and abundance of All Quiet.
There's something, a spectacle, there's a spectacle aspect to it.
Absolutely. There's very much a spectacle aspect of it, which they, again, it's just maybe not what they're going for right now.
Right.
The other conversation we have to have is, you know, if we're committed to the idea of putting a veteran in, which film does it buck? And so we have 2 spots taken and 3 open. One should be a veteran, which essentially means that the rest of the films are fighting for 2 spots. And I think the popular thinking is that the 3 strongest films fighting for it are likely the DGA, the remnants of the DGA 5, which is Hamnet, Marty, and Frankenstein. And so which way do you go?
You know, it's very difficult because on the one hand, you know, Frankenstein did make that BAFTA long list mention, and I think at the most recent sound designers, it also got a mention.
Yes.
Which is good. But in general, it's been a little bit overlooked, you know, because it's just not a film that's being sort of synonymous with the idea of, you know, editing being at the forefront of it. And if you see the film, I think you understand why. I think the favorites for those last 2 spots are Marty Supreme and Hamnet, obviously. But there's a very big issue that I think not enough people are paying attention to. And it's that both Hamnet and Marty Supreme are co-edited by their directors. So Josh Safdie is a co-editor on Marty Supreme, and Chloe Zhao is a co-editor on Hamnet. And it has never happened where I believe we couldn't find an instance where 2 directors were mentioned in best editing.
Right.
Certainly directors are being more present in the editing category. You saw last year Sean Baker won both director and editing, so that's not surprising. But what is surprising is to have 2 cases of that.
Right.
And to have 2 instances where 2 filmmakers, 2 directors get nominated here. That hasn't happened.
Chloe Zhao herself is actually a great example here because she was nominated for Nomadland.
Right.
Back when she won Best Director and Best Picture, she was nominated in this category. Cuarón is another one that comes to mind. He's an editor that was nominated for Gravity, won for Gravity, and was nominated for Children of Men. So certainly you're right. The question is, with the restrictions we have between minimal veterans, international films that maybe aren't bubbling to the surface as much as they should be, does that force us into a scenario where we're going to nominate 2 directors at the same time? I also want to mention, again, between the 2 of them, Josh is the one that has not been nominated here. You know, Chloe Zhao has. Josh hasn't been nominated for any Academy Award, much less one for editing. And that he's also editing alongside his co-writer, Ronald Bronstein. I don't know if that's a plus or a minus, but I think you and I are certainly sort of saying, is there room for 2 directors?
Right. It certainly feels extremely odd. And I think, you know, even when we reveal our top 5, I remain very uncertain about it.
Right.
And I don't know if we'll be flip-flopping at the end, but it's certainly one that is a little bit of a head scratcher.
No, I will say
something else to consider is that, you know, when we're talking about a Best Actor winner and a Best Actress winner. You know, for the last few years, the trend has been that the winners for the lead acting categories, those films tended to be in the editing category. You know, going as far back as, you know, 2018, for example, those lead acting winners were in films that were nominated in editing. So, you know, whether or not that holds enough weight this year, you know, remains to be seen. But certainly that's something that's going for HAMNET and something like Marty Supreme to both get in. Yeah.
I'll also say the other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of being difficult to choose between those two films co-edited by their directors is that Chloe Zhao this time is working with Alfonso Goncalves, right? And he has a little bit of a history.
Right. He's never been nominated and has been working for a very long time. He's a fantastic editor with a very prolific and celebrated and dynamic filmography.
He's a Guild winner. He was a Guild winner for his work on mostly television. I mean, True Detective, Mildred Pierce, and things like that.
So it's hard to picture them having the opportunity to finally welcome him to the club and give him a first nomination and then not take it.
Pass it up.
You know, it's strange.
Right. This is the editor of Carol. This is the editor of I'm Still Here, which was a Best Picture nominee last year.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. Is this another occasion, not unlike Max Richter, which we were talking about earlier, of like right time, right situation. It's just a moment to finally nominate Alfonso Goncalves.
Right. Exactly. 100%. And so I think that's going in his favor. I think going in this favor of Marty Supreme is that, again, the Safdies tend to have very sort of chaotic driven films that incorporate a lot of editing. So, I mean, you know, there's much more, you know, in your face editing than there in Marty Supreme than there is in HAMNET. That could play a factor, or could it play a detractor?
Right.
You know, and that editors think it's too overly edited, or, you know, to let's create chaos for let's create chaos sake. You know, it remains to be seen, because this will be the first time that we see how the Academy reacts to a Safdie film at large. It's difficult.
I think the other thing that I would just mention is that, you know, as far as Frankenstein, something that's kind of fascinating is that the editor in contention there has a history in the industry of working on, you know, bigger films like the John Wick series. And certainly those films have their fans, even if the Guild isn't one of them. But I think it's also interesting because I feel like looking back at their filmography, they have a little bit of a history of working on Guillermo del Toro's films when they were starting out, you know, like in an assistant level. And then this is their first opportunity to come back and work with Guillermo as the lead editor. And it was a very positive experience, but it's kind of a funny story that's online about how that was able to happen for the editor, Evan Schiff. It's kind of a funny story if it comes full circle. That being said, you know, Evan Schiff, the film editor, doesn't have as much accolades for his work because, again, sometimes they're smaller films, or they're just different films, you know, like more blockbuster films, popcorn films, mainstream films. But I do think there's something to be said, and we'll revisit this, I think, across many categories, just the idea of when Netflix has two films in Best Picture, doesn't that often give them a better chance of landing one of them at least into a category? And, you know, last time they had two was Power of the Dog and Don't Look Up, and they were both nominated. And the time before that, it was Irishman and Marriage Story, and Irishman was still nominated. And so I do wonder if the Netflix holding two Best Picture positions maybe gives an advantage to Frankenstein showing up here.
It would fix our issue of having two directors be cited here.
Exactly. It's
or possibly, as you said, not having a veteran and having Frankenstein and a list of all newbies.
Yeah. So I think this category can go a lot of different ways, and it's very tough to stick to a specific call right now. And I think there is wiggle room. I think right now we're leaning towards a situation, but this is certainly one of the categories that I think is a little bit harder to get a handle on, because you have so many different sort of statistics that favor conflicting sides, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so the question is, you're really just betting on which one's going to hold out and which of the others is going to fall by the wayside.
Exactly.
And so what are we thinking right now?
And so our final predictions, hopefully, for film editing are One Battle After Another, Sinners, Marty Supreme, Hamnet, and F1.
And on that note, let's end our discussion for today with a deep dive into the best international film category. Obviously, thus far, international films playing a marginal part in our predictions thus far in this first leg of our series of episodes. So where do you think the chips fall in this category?
Well, let's just do a very quick rundown. We have a short list here as well, which is, very useful, of the ones that we're even contemplating. The films were even the films that can get nominated, and that's Belen from Argentina, The Secret Agent from Brazil, It Was Just an Accident from France, Sound of Falling from Germany, Homebound from India, The President's Cake from Iraq, Kokuho from Japan, All That's Left of You from Jordan, Sentimental Value from Norway, Palestine 36 from Palestine, No Other Choice from South Korea, SIRÃT from Spain, Late Shift from Switzerland, Left-Handed Girl from Taiwan, and The Voice of Hinrajah from Tunisia. This is a very interesting group of films. I think that if you look, everyone is on the notion that Neon could break history and be all 5 nominees. In fact, I think that's the favorite right now. The favorite is for Neon to get in for The Secret Agent. It Was Just an Accident, Sentimental Value, No Other Choice, and SIRÃT.
That's the narrative, right? That's what everyone's going to be looking out for.
Right.
And I think you and I both agree that only became more of the favorite of what's going to happen after those Oscar shortlists were revealed, right?
Right.
And you saw, for example, what was essentially the film that was easiest to kick out among those 5, SIRÁT, show all up over the place.
Right.
Right. And all of a sudden the film where you sort of resisted, Neon can get all 5, SIRÁT, no one knows that filmmaker. It's too artsy. No one's going to want to vote for it. Oh, what the hell? It just showed up everywhere.
Right.
And then that being said, there are films that underperformed. No Other Choice didn't show up in very many places. But it did have major Golden Globe nominations. And so.
Well, I will say that No Other Choice really underperformed in the Oscar shortlist. It really underperformed in the BAFTA long lists.
As did most international films.
Right, true. And so that's something to not overlook, as well as, again, it would be history for Neon to do that.
Right.
We also have a group of films, speaking of studios that are dominating this category, we have a group of films that are from Watermelon Pictures. I believe 3 films, and that's The Voice of Hinrajah, Palestine 36, and All That's Left of You, are all under the Watermelon Pictures banner. So that's another company that's doing very well here. You got Mubi being represented by, I believe,
Sound of Falling.
The Sound of Falling, a great film out of Cannes. Sony Picture Classics that does well in this category are being represented by The President's Cake, which would be the first time that Iraq makes it into the foreign language film category, which is also would be historic. It's a big deal.
Which is usually a big deal for this branch.
And it's usually something that encourages them to embrace you. And if you've seen The President's Cake, as we have, it would make perfect sense in this category. It's the kind of film that I think would definitely appeal to members. Interestingly enough, something to point out is that in order to vote for the in the voting process to come up with these 15, voters had to see a certain number of films to qualify to be able to vote. And now to select the 5 that are going to make it to the very end, voters have to see all 15.
Right.
And that's a new set of rules that wasn't there, previously.
And that will likely knock out some voters because
some voters will say, I think I won't.
Yeah.
But I think it also favors films that a majority of voters might respond to, as opposed to just a select group of voters. That's A. And B, voters that have been more aware of these films, and the international circuit, Cannes, Berlin, Venice, etc. So I think a film like, for example, SIRÁT should do very well, because I think that if you're seeing all the films and you're aware of the films that are making this short list, you're aware of that film and you're responding to that film. That's one reason I think it did well in the short lists.
Right.
So basically, I think it's a race to determine which film is going to knock Neon off the pedestal of being able to, if any, to complete that history.
Right.
And like I said, considering the rules, I think the films with the most visibility are going to be the ones that are most favored to make the top 5. We do know, for example, that Kokuho also made the shortlist for makeup and has had some noise surrounding it. There was a screening a while back.
Right.
Tom Cruise was a part of that screening, so I think people are watching that film. It's Japan's most successful film of the year,
Which is great. Yeah.
right? That's a big deal.
Yeah, No Other Choice just did well in the US right now. It came out and it did well, but I think it did well in South Korea as one of the top earning films there. And now it was significantly below what a film like The Handmaiden earned back in 2016. So that's something to be aware of.
Right.
And then something else to be aware of is, little things like we already talked about the historical context of a nomination for Iraq in this category for The President's Cake. So when you Picture Classics finally got back their mojo, they're coming off the win for I'm Still Here, got nominated for The Teacher's Lounge. But historical context, period, is a factor here, an asset here. And films, for example, like The Voice of Human Rajab and Belen, both of those films have that. Right.
Also, something to look out that I noticed while I was preparing for this conversation is that number one, Netflix does well in this category, and they have The Left-Handed Girl. So they do actually really well in this category, but it's not unheard of for them to miss. But that is something to consider for Left-Handed Girl. That being said, Sean Baker is attached to that project. And if you've seen the film like I have and can, there's, the Sean Baker energy is present in that film, and voters might feel like, we did that last, we've visited Sean Baker, we've celebrated Sean Baker last year. Let's, do something new this year.
Right.
Another thing to consider is that the camera image, which is one of the most prominent awards platforms for the cinematographers, Late Shift from Switzerland, won the top prize there, I believe. And that's something similar that happened, I think, last year when The Girl with the Needle, I think, did well in that awards platform, and was able to get into, foreign language film.
Right.
And I wasn't expecting it to.
Homebound has Marty as an executive producer.
Right.
Started streaming on Netflix right in time for voters to start watching it. So that helps.
Right.
And All That's Left of You was a big hit from Sundance. Something like Past 936, like, I haven't seen the film, but what I do know based on the trailers is that it has sort of an old school energy that is going to appeal to some voters, like just an old school epic. Feels a little stuffy to me, but I feel like that could very much appeal to them.
Right, exactly. And so again, in that race to determine which neon film or which film is going to, take out a neon film.
Right. And which neon film is at the bottom of the totem pole.
Right. It's not the easiest task, but my eyes automatically land on The Voice of Hindu Rajab. Number one, the Oscars in general should have some presence from a film that won an award at Venice. And this year, Alexander Payne's jury gave it to a wide variety of films, not many of which stand to, make an impact in the race or even be considered for awards. One of the few ones would be The Voice of Hindu Rajab, which won basically second place. It was probably close to winning the big award. And if it had, it'd probably be a completely different story with a film like this, even competing for Best Picture, given its timeliness. And so, the filmmaker behind The Voice of Hindu Rajab has been nominated in the past. She's had a film get into the foreign language category and the documentary film category. The team behind the Voice of Hindu Rajab, if you look at, the producers, it's a lot of very well-named, well-regarded figures. Plan B is attached to it. Rooney Mara is attached to it. Joaquin Phoenix is attached to it.
You have the producer of Zone of Interest, who's a nominee for that. You have the producer of Navalny, who won an award for documentary.
Right.
And so certainly it has a lot of support from these, figures in the industry.
Right. And interestingly enough as well, we cannot overlook that The Voice of Hindu Rajab was nominated for Best Film at the European Film Awards.
Yeah.
So I think all those things strengthen the case that The Voice of Hindu Rajab should not go empty-handed.
Yeah.
come awards time.
Or it's going to be tough to deny, you
Right.
know. I mean, I think you brought it up in one of our previous episodes. If you guys want to check it out, but just that idea of everyone talks about the Neon 5 that got in among the 15. There's a Watermelon 3 in there,
Yeah.
right? And it's very difficult for these distributors, studios to get multiple people in there, and it certainly works in their favor when they have multiple contenders. You can look at last year's Netflix, Amelia Perez. The entry Make Money Before Grandma Dies, that helps. And so I do think that 3 entries from Watermelon shows strength amongst the voting members who watch those films.
Yeah.
And it would make a lot of sense for that to be sort of the distributor
that kind of breaks
the 5 from Neon. I think that would make a lot of sense. I think the Venice point you made is excellent. I think historical context is important because the Neon 5 are all fictional.
Yeah.
SIRÀT, No Other Choice, Sentimental Value, it's just an accident, Secret Agent. They're all fictional works.
Even though, Secret Agent and It Was Just an Accident are grounded in a context that is, real.
Certainly, they're certainly having a discussion with a historical moment. But that being said, there's just no real figure, for example, like, and I'm Still Here, right? And it doesn't have to always be biographical, but some kind of real figure around the film, I think, helps. And I think that's something else going for Hein Rajab, right? You talked about the mention at the European Film Award, which was, I think, really significant, right? Because, it isn't necessarily, strictly speaking,
sort of like European,
sort of like, again, it was just an accident where it's nominated for the European Film Awards, but not much European in it. It's very much a story about Iran. But the other thing that I think is significant, what do you make of the inclusion of Katra Benhania in the BAFTA long list for Best Director?
Right. I mean, yeah, I think that is also significant, even though, again, the BAFTAs have a specific rule for directors that they want to, have equal representation. So they include half men, half female. But obviously she landed at the top tier of female filmmakers.
I mean, I think it's important that, like, she was still able to be listed, for example, over someone like Nia DaCosta, who you would imagine being sort of campaigned by Amazon could be in a better position, right? And so while you're right, there is a policy that helps build a more inclusive slate of 10, I do think it's meaningful that she's there because it goes to show you that her film is being watched. And her film is possibly being watched more than a couple of other ones. For example, Left-Handed Girl did not show up. So I think that's meaningful. And in the same way that I think it's meaningful that No Other Choice did not show up at the BAFTA long list for adapted screenplay, while The Secret Agent did for original, right? And it was just an accident and Sentimental Value.
Right.
And so I definitely think that we're sort of looking at the right film to create an upset. And the question is, are we predicting the right film to fall flat?
Right. One quick thing, I think that there's a difference between us trying to see which film can upset the Neon history-making moment. But I find it right now, I think it's difficult to imagine that there would be more than one Neon film failing, given that it was just an accident, Sentimental Value, and now even The Secret Agent stands so firm in the race for Best Picture, or such heavy contenders for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. It's really hard to, take those 3 out. And then when you consider how well SIRÀT has done, in the shortlist for the Oscar shortlist, it's hard to imagine that film wouldn't at least factor into a foreign language film. So really, I think that we're only looking at a failure of one film to be able to make it to Neon, to be able to make it to the top 5 and then break Neon's streak. And that's No Other Choice.
Right.
Even though No Other Choice did well at the Golden Globes, you're right, it has done well with critics groups. Hasn't really done well at the Oscars in terms of shortlists. I mean, it had a very poor showing. It also had a very poor showing at the BAFTA. And I also want to point out that there's something to consider with No Other Choice in that Park Chan-wook last year faced a lot of, backlash within some sections of the industry because of accusations of breaking the the strike,
The writer's
the
strike.
writer's strike when that was going on, and he eventually got banned from the WGA.
Right.
And we still don't really know how much that could come into effect when voters are considering whether to nominate a Park Chan-wook film for any Oscar.
Right.
And right now, considering how well placed the other 4 Neon films are, we would say that the one that is most in danger to not make it is No Other Choice.
Right.
Despite the acclaim, despite that it's one of the best films of the year, it's the one that's at the at the lower end, the lowest end of the 5.
It doesn't help, I think, right, that like Park Chan-wook and all his films have had trouble here, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's Decision to Leave or The Handmaiden, he has a little bit of trouble breaking that barrier. And if you we did a little bit of digging, but South Korea has only gotten in here once, and that was when Parasite was able to win. And for as much cinemas and culture, really pop culture, that South Korean produces, it's a surprisingly low number.
Yeah, 100%.
I think this is a really timely piece, one of his more timely ones that could really resonate on a global scale. But you can't deny that it's been difficult for him to, get over that hurdle. You add the controversy that you were just referencing, it could just make things more difficult.
I also want to say, I certainly don't think this way, but I don't put it past the Academy to, that some members might feel that, again, you were mentioning the last time South Korea popped up tier was for Parasite, and some people might say that there's some DNA being shared between both of those films.
Oh, certainly.
In terms of, some of the overarching themes that they're tackling. Possibly that might be something that makes it less attractive for some voters, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, Tunisia has only been recognized once, I believe,
That's
also
right.
for another Kauthar Banhania film.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a race for which one of those two
will score a second.
Which country will score a second nomination.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that, some people I think are not considering largely enough, how vulnerable No Other Choice might be.
The other thing I kind of like that we've sort of narrowed down the conversation to these 2 movies is that they fit perfectly into that sort of dynamic that you were saying exists within the Academy of, you want to have a film from Venice.
Yeah.
And you got a Venice winner in Voice of Rajab, and you have what was controversially the big snub out of Venice.
That's what I wanted to bring up.
No Other Choice.
That's what I wanted to bring up, that, we can neglect that. Let's see, in Venice, No Other Choice went blank and didn't get any awards, even though it was highly favored to win something.
Mm-hmm.
That's a decision that was made by a group of filmmakers who obviously thought other films were more impressive.
Interesting.
Also, interestingly, I think we would be having a much different conversation if No Other Choice had won Venice.
Oh, yeah.
If that were the case, we would be talking about No Other Choice getting into Best Picture.
Yeah.
I also think that it matters that a film like Decision to Leave was able to capitalize on the moment and win the Best Director prize at Cannes and still fall short of getting into foreign language film that year. I believe it didn't even make the shortlist. I might be mistaken, but I think it might have even missed the shortlist that year. So I just think there's a lot here suggesting that No Other Choice is both the weakest of the Neon films and also perhaps very likely to miss out on this nomination.
Right. I mean, I think I like the scenario you've set up where we could end up seeing an upset and Hin Rajab is able to take the spot of Park Chan-wook and Decision to Leave, which was shortlisted. Just he falls short again, and I think the situation surrounding the WGA can't help. Again, remember, this is a category opened to all voters.
Right.
They just have to meet the criteria of watching the films to be eligible to cast that vote. But all voters can cast a vote here.
And I also mentioned that I don't think The Voice of Rajab is a perfect film by any means, but I think it's an effective film. And I think that when you place a voter having to see all these films, that's a film that's going to stick out because of, you know, the innovation that it's having and the technique that it's having of incorporating, you know, Hind Rajab's real voice, which can't help but really, you know, pierce your heart, you know, when you're experiencing the film.
Right.
I think that'll go a long way in, you know, having voters who watch all 15 have that be a film that really sticks out to them at the very end.
Right. You know, I think it makes a lot of sense. I do want to give like one last shout out to, you know, don't sleep on Iraq making history here with the President's Cake.
Right.
Same thing. Don't sleep on, you know, for example, Past 936 sneaking in here. These are things that can still happen. Is the SIRÄT spot as sewn up as we think? The Oscar shortlist would make us think so, right? If the Oscar shortlist did not exist, or it had missed so many pivotal mentions there, then certainly I would think SIRÄT is, you know, too adventurous of a film for the more conventional Oscar voter. But all those mentions that it got, and including a mention, for example, like casting at BAFTA, I think is an excellent sign for it's resonating.
Right. And the other thing that I want to point out is that when we consider the neon films of The Secret Agent, It Was Just an Accident, Sentimental Value, and SIRÄT, they're all Cannes winners.
Yeah.
They're all winners at Cannes.
Mm-hmm.
No Other Choice is a loser at Venice.
Yeah.
You know, in a way, it can't help but stick out.
Yeah.
You know, and again, I love No Other Choice. It's one of my favorite films of the year.
Yeah.
It absolutely deserves to be nominated here. But I can't help but feel it's the weakest.
Right.
And The Voice of Hind Rajab feels like it should not go empty-handed.
I agree. And I think, to me, it's echoed in the BAFTA inclusion of Katra Benhanian Best Director and the BAFTA omission of No Other Choice, an adapted screenplay.
And the European Film Award nomination.
And the European Film Award nomination for Hind Rajab.
So right now, our final prediction for foreign language film is Sentimental Value, It Was Just an Accident, The Secret Agent, SIRÄT, and The Voice of Hind Rajab. All right, and that is a wrap on our first episode devoted to predicting the upcoming Academy Awards, the nominations. We intend to have our second group of predictions up later this week, and our final episode dedicated to predictions early next week. We went through a lot today.
Yeah, we did a lot. We got some pretty, I think, bold predictions, and I think we pointed out some significant loopholes that people are overlooking. It's an exciting time. Oscar voting is going on as we speak. So stick with us. We're going to break down the rest of the categories. We're building up to everyone's favorite categories in our third episode, including Best Picture, Acting Awards, Screenplay. Catch up on our website. We have updated Oscar predictions there and Precursor Awards. And you can follow us on Twitter at Academy Anon. Visit our website, framesandflicker.com, for Oscar predictions. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be with you again shortly for the second batch of Oscar nomination predictions. Until then, this is Joseph.
And this is Jules, and it's been a pleasure.
If you've been enjoying the Academy Anonymous podcast and want to support the work we're doing, there's a voluntary support link in the show notes. Totally optional. Just a way to help us keep the podcast going. Thank you for listening.
The music on this episode, entitled Cool Cats, was graciously provided by Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. https://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0.
Disclaimer. The Academy Anonymous podcast is in no way affiliated or endorsed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.